The 11th of January. 3 words, spoken quietly. They did not need to be louder. Across the ballroom of the Countess of Brancaster's house on Belgrave Square, beneath 3 chandeliers and 100 pairs of eyes hungry for something to talk about, the Duke of Ravensmere said them just loudly enough for one person to hear. Rosamond Ellery, Viscountess Ashgrove. She had been standing by the window. She had been standing by windows for 6 years. Windows were safe. Windows asked nothing of her and did not require her to pretend that the humiliation surrounding her life was invisible. But that night, the window betrayed her, because when she raised her eyes, the most feared man in England was looking directly at her. Not politely, not curiously. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has waited too long for. Then he crossed the floor. The crowd parted. No one stood in his way. The Duke of Ravensmere had never in his life been obliged to push anyone aside. People simply moved. He stopped in front of her. He did not bow. He did not say her name. He said a date, and he walked away. 300 people in that room believed they had just watched a claim being staked. By morning, all London would be saying that the Duke had chosen his next woman. They were all wrong. Her husband was wrong. The woman living in her own house was wrong. And Rosamond, standing very still by the window, with her breath caught somewhere beneath her ribs, was wrong as well. Because there was something she did not yet know. 7 weeks earlier, in a room nobody had been watching, something small and dry had been signed into law, a paragraph of fine print at the foot of a newspaper column, set in type so mean that a reader might pass over it entirely on the way to the shipping notices. And it would come into force on the 11th of January. For 6 years, Rosamond Ellery had been preparing for a day she had never quite dared believe would arrive. It was now 83 days away. The orchestra did not stop. That was the strange part. Afterwards, she would remember thinking that the world ought to have paused for at least a bar or two, and that its refusal to do so was somehow the most unnerving thing about the evening. She did not move from the window. She had learned, in 6 years, that the safest response to being looked at was to give the room nothing further to look at. So she stood with her gloved hands folded, and she counted the panes in the sash above her shoulder, 8 across, 6 down, 48, and the 4 small squares of the fanlight above the door beyond, which made 52. It was a foolish habit. She had never been able to break it. When she was frightened, her mind went looking for something that could be counted and made to come out the same every time. Around her, the room reassembled itself into conversation, and the conversation was about her. She could hear it in the shape of it rather than the words, a rustle passing outward from the place where he had stood, the way water moves when something heavy has gone into it. Fans lifted. 2 women by the pier glass turned their heads at precisely the same moment and then turned them back. Old Lady Brancaster, who had spent 40 years learning exactly how much interest a hostess might show in a scandal without being said to have enjoyed it, arrived at Rosamond's elbow with a glass of negus she had not asked for and inquired whether she found the room warm. "A little," Rosamond said. "He spoke to you, he did." Lady Brancaster waited. Rosamond drank the negus, which was too sweet, and said nothing at all. And after a moment, the old woman made a small sound of disappointment and went away to be useful elsewhere. The Duke had not gone far. He stood now near the doors with 2 men from the Board of Trade, listening to them with an attention that appeared complete, and he did not look at her again. Not once for the rest of the evening. She was almost certain of it, because she checked 11 times. He was a tall man, and he wore black in a season when other men had begun to wear blue, and his hair had a good deal of gray in it for a man of 36. She knew that he was 36. She could not have said how she knew. One accumulated such facts about the Duke of Ravensmere, the way one accumulated facts about the weather. They arrived whether or not one had asked for them. He owned 4,000 acres in Northumberland and a good deal of the ground beneath Bloomsbury. He had brought down a cabinet minister in '53 by the simple expedient of buying the man's debts and declining to mention them. He did not dance. He did not gamble. He was said to have no friends, only obligations, and to discharge the obligations with a thoroughness that made people wish he would not. He had never, in 6 years of being in the same rooms as Rosamond Ellery, addressed a single word to her. And now he had crossed a ballroom, in front of everyone, to give her a date. She turned the thing over and could make nothing of it. And the not making anything had a quality she recognized and mistrusted. It felt like hope. Hope was expensive. She had learned the price of it at 17 and had not purchased any since. Across the room her husband was standing very still by the card-room door with a glass in his hand, and he was looking at her. That was the second thing that happened that night, and afterwards she would think it was the more important of the two. Rupert Vane, 4th Viscount Ashgrove, had not looked at his wife in company since the spring of '53. He had looked in her general direction. He had looked at the space she occupied when it was necessary to establish that he had a wife and that she was where a wife should be. But he had not turned his face towards her with the whole of his attention behind it. And now he had, and his color was not good. Beside him stood a handsome woman of 34 in dove-gray silk, who was not looking at Rosamond at all. Camilla Vaux, Baroness Milbourne, was looking at the doors where the Duke stood. Her expression was pleasant and entirely still. She had the air of a woman doing sums. Rosamond set down the negus. The room was still watching her. That was the thing she could not get past, the thing she carried down the steps and into the carriage and all the way along Grosvenor Street with her hands in her lap. For 6 years she had been the least regarded woman in London. She had been discussed. Certainly, her situation was thought amusing, and there was a joke about it that had been going round since '54 and had not improved with age. But discussion was not the same as being looked at. She had perfected a way of entering a room that caused people's eyes to slide past her as though she were a pillar or a plant, and she had come to think of it as a species of safety. Tonight 300 people had looked directly at her, and had gone on looking for the better part of an hour. She did not yet know why that mattered. She only knew, sitting in the dark of the carriage with the lamps of Park Lane sliding across her knees, that some part of her had begun to keep count of the faces. He had not intended to go to the exhibition at all. Gideon Marchcroft had been 3 times already, at the request of 3 separate committees, and had formed the view that the Crystal Palace was a very large greenhouse, in which the nations of the earth had agreed to display their manufactures and their vanity in roughly equal measure. But the Duchess of Somerset had asked him to accompany her party on the 14th of June, and there were reasons he could not refuse the Duchess of Somerset, and so, on the 14th of June, 1851, he went again. The party made directly for the Koh-i-Noor, as every party did. The diamond had been the great disappointment of the season. It sat in a gilded cage in the western nave, guarded like a criminal, and the newspapers had promised a stone of unearthly fire, and the fault was not with the diamond but with the light, which came down through the glass in a flat gray wash, and found nothing in it to catch. People arrived expecting a sun and were shown a piece of glass. They queued for 20 minutes to be disappointed, and then said loudly that they had not been disappointed at all. Gideon stood at the back of the crush and let the Duchess's nieces exclaim, and a girl went past him, walking the other way. That was all it was. She came through the press of people with her chin down, moving with the particular economy of someone who has learned not to be in anyone's road, and she was going away from the diamond. In half an hour he had not seen a single person go away from the diamond. He watched her out of idleness and then out of something else. She went up the nave to the transept, where the great elms stood. He had forgotten about the elms. They had been the difficulty of the whole enterprise, 3 vast old trees in Hyde Park that the commissioners had been forbidden to cut, and Paxton had solved it by raising a barrel roof and building the palace over them, so that the trees now stood inside the glass with their crowns 80 feet up, and the sparrows still going about in them. Everyone had thought it a triumph of engineering. Nobody looked at them. The girl looked at them for a very long time. She was 17 or thereabouts, in white muslin that had been made over from something, with a face that was not beautiful and was going to be. She stood beneath the nearest elm, with her head tipped back, and she did not move, and after a while Gideon realized what she was doing. She was counting the panes. Her lips moved slightly. Her eyes went along a row and then dropped and went back the other way, and she lost her place and began again, patient as a clerk. He was near enough by then to see her hand come up and mark the air with one finger. There was a thing he understood, standing there, that he was never afterwards able to explain to his own satisfaction. She was not admiring the roof. She was working out how much of it there was. She had come away from the most valuable object in the world to stand under 3 trees that had been shut inside a building, and she was measuring the building. She dropped her hand. She looked at the trees a moment longer, and something went across her face that was not sorrow and was not far from it, and then she turned and went back down the nave towards the diamond and the crowd and whoever had brought her. He did not follow. That was the part he would come to think about. In the years afterwards, at unreasonable hours, he had been within 20 feet of her, and he had let her go, and at the time it had seemed not merely correct, but obvious, because he had learned 2 years earlier, and at a cost he did not permit himself to name what his intervention was worth. He had reached out his hand once, with the whole weight of his name behind it. He knew precisely what it had bought, so he stood under the elms and let a girl walk away and told himself it was restraint. He made inquiries. He was not able to prevent himself from making inquiries. Ellery, the second daughter of a Shropshire baronet, of whom nothing was known except that his affairs were said to be embarrassed. 3 weeks later the notice appeared in the Morning Post. Ashgrove was 41 and had a bad estate and a worse reputation, and the girl was 17, and the settlement had presumably been agreed before anybody troubled to mention it to her. Gideon read it twice, folded the paper, and put it in the fire, and stood looking at the fire for some time. He was 30 years old. He had 4,000 acres, a seat in the Lords, and more money than he had any use for. And he sat down that evening and worked out, on paper, precisely what all of it was worth against a marriage settlement lawfully executed between 2 consenting men. The sum came out at nothing. It came out at nothing every way he tried it. He put the paper in the fire as well. The bank at Shrewsbury stopped payment in the last week of March, 1,851, and Sir Marcus Ellery's affairs went with it. He had not been a gambler or a fool. He had done a thing that seemed, in the doing of it, to be merely decent. He had put his name to his brother-in-law's bills, twice, in '48. When the brother-in-law had been in a difficulty that everybody agreed was temporary. The difficulty had proved not to be temporary. When the bank went, the bills came home, and a baronet with 1,100 a year and 3 daughters discovered that his signature had been the most valuable thing he owned and that he had given it away. Rosamond was told none of this at the time. She was told it afterwards, in pieces, by servants. What she was told at the time was delivered in the small parlor at Kitesbourne on an evening in August, while her mother folded linen. "Lord Ashgrove has made an offer for you." Rosamond had a book open on her knee. She remembered the book afterwards with great clarity and could never remember a word of what was in it. "Your father has accepted. I have never spoken to Lord Ashgrove." "You have no need to have spoken to him." Her mother did not look up. She was matching the corners of a pillowcase, and her hands were entirely steady. "He is a viscount. He has an estate in Berkshire. You are a second daughter with no fortune, and after McCalmus you will have no house."
Rosamond said, "He is 1 in 40. He is, Mama."
"This is not a conversation, Rosamond." The pillowcase went on to the pile, and her mother reached for the next. "It is a kindness." There was a great deal that Rosamond might have said, and she was 17 years old and could not think of any of it, and by the time she could think of it, she had been married 4 months. They were married in November, in the church at Kitesbourne, in a gown of ivory satin that had been her aunt's and had been let out at the shoulders and taken in at the waist, and weighed, she thought. Walking up the aisle on her father's arm rather more than she did. Nobody had asked her opinion of the gown. Nobody had asked her opinion of anything, and it did not occur to her until some years later that this had been the whole of the arrangement rather than an oversight within it. Her husband waited at the rail with the expression of a man reviewing an agreement he had already signed. He spoke to her twice that day. The first time was at the breakfast, to tell her that her place at dinner would be on his left. The second was at Ashgrove House in Grosvenor Street, at 10:30 that night, in the hall, with the servants standing along the wall. "You are not to go into my study," he said. "Not at any time. Not for any reason." Then he went upstairs. There was a settlement, of course. There is always a settlement. Rosamond had signed it in a solicitor's room in Lincoln's Inn Fields on a wet morning in October, in the presence of 4 men who talked over her head about the whole of it in language she could not follow, and she had signed where she was told to sign. The greater part of it concerned what Lord Ashgrove would receive. There was one clause that concerned her. £4,000 in the 3%, settled to her separate use, the income to be paid to her half-yearly, the capital not to be touched, and the whole of it placed in the hands of a trustee. The trustee was her brother. Theo had come down from Aldershot for the signing. He was 23, a lieutenant in the 55th, and he stood at the back of that room in Lincoln's Inn Fields with his cap under his arm and his face perfectly blank. And when it was done, he took her out on to the pavement and said, "It is a very small sum. It is more than I have ever had. It is £4,000, Rose. He will spend that on horses in a 12-month. He looked up the street. "They put it in my name because they think I am too junior to be any trouble. Should he ever come to me about it, I shall be a great deal of trouble." She laughed. She had not expected to laugh that week. "I mean it," he said. "Any paper about that money wants my hand on it. Mine. Remember that." She said she would remember it, and she did remember it, and it meant nothing to her for 6 years. Lady Milbourne came to Ashgrove House on a Tuesday afternoon in April 1852, with 3 trunks and a maid, and the trunks went up to the Rose bedroom. Rosamond, who was 18 and had been a wife for 5 months, understood the visit to be a visit. Her husband had a great many acquaintances she had not met. She dressed for dinner with some care, being anxious to do it correctly, and came down to find a woman of 28 in the drawing-room who rose at once, crossed the carpet, took both her hands, and said, "You are far younger than they told me. How do you take your tea?" That was the first thing Camilla Vaux ever said to her, and Rosamond thought about it for 6 years afterwards. She was not cruel. That was the whole of the difficulty. Rosamond had prepared herself, over time for a great many things, and had no defense at all against a woman who remembered that she did not care for anchovies, who noticed on the 14th of March that it was her birthday when her own husband did not, who sent up a shawl to the north wing on a cold night with a note saying that the flues on that side had never drawn properly and she was sorry for it. The rose bedroom adjoined his lordship's chamber. Rosamond's rooms were at the far end of the north wing, past the linen store, where the flues did not draw. She did not work it out for 11 days. When she did work it out, she was sitting at her glass with her hair down, and Martha Craik behind her with the brush, and she asked a question she had already answered because she wanted to hear it answered aloud. "How long has Lady Milbourne known his lordship?" Martha's hands did not stop. She had been in the house 4 months longer than Rosamond had. "Since before the Crimea talk, my lady." "Some years." "She is a widow." "Since 50. Lord Milbourne left her very comfortable." A pause exactly the length of one stroke of the brush. "She has her own money, my lady. She does not need anybody's." That was the sentence Rosamond took to bed with her, and it was the sentence she woke with, and it was some time before she understood why it had lodged where it did. It was not the jealousy. She could find no jealousy in herself, then or later, which she supposed was itself a kind of verdict on the marriage. It was the arithmetic of it. There were 3 grown women in that house. One of them was paid wages. One of them had a widow's jointure, a house in Half Moon Street, and 400 a year that no man on earth could touch. And one of them had a husband, and therefore had nothing. The house learned its arrangements quickly, as houses do. By the autumn of 52, Lady Milbourne ordered the dinners. By 53, the tradesmen brought their books to her. It was done without a single unkind word, and Rosamond's opinion continued to be sought on small matters in the pleasantest manner imaginable. And it was some years before she understood that being consulted and being obeyed are 2 entirely different things. She was not a wife who had been wronged. That would have been a position, and positions could be defended. She was surplus. The carriage turned in at Grosvenor Street a little after 2 in the morning, and the hall was lit, which it should not have been. Her husband was standing in the study doorway with his coat off. "You dance with nobody," he said. "No." "He spoke to you." Rosamond drew off her gloves. Her hands, she noticed with some interest, were steady. "He did? What did he say?" There was a moment in which she might have told him. It sat there, quite open, and she looked at it, and did not go through. "He remarked upon the room," she said. "It was very warm." Rupert Vane stared at his wife. 6 years he had lived within 30 feet of her, and he examined her now as one might examine a document that has arrived unexpectedly and may prove to be a bill. "Ravensmere does not remark upon rooms." "Then I cannot help you, my lord." It is what he said. She went up the stairs. She did not hurry, and she did not look back. And she was aware the whole way of the peculiar lightness of having told a lie for the first time in her married life, and found it cost her nothing at all. Lady Milbourne stood at the turn of the landing above, in her wrapper, with a candle. She had been listening. She made no pretense otherwise. Rosamond had expected, if she had expected anything, amusement, or a warning, or the particular gentleness that was worse than either. She got none of them. Camilla Vaux stood, with the candle held a little to one side, and looked at her the way a woman looks at a column of figures that has come out wrong twice, and is going to be added a 3rd time. "Good night, Lady Ashgrove," she said. And she went back along the passage to the rose bedroom, and did not shut the door for some while. She had known since the 28th of August. It had come in the 2nd column of the Times, below a report of the harvest, and above an advertisement for a patent mangle, and it had been set in the smallest type the paper possessed. Royal assent had been given to a number of measures on the previous day. There was a list. It ran to 11 lines. One of the lines said, "An act to amend the law relating to divorce and matrimonial causes in England." Rosamond had read it 4 times standing up in the breakfast room at Ashgrove House with the paper in her hands and the coffee going cold. And then she had sat down because her legs had stopped being reliable. She had gone out that afternoon and bought the Times for the 2 following days, and the Morning Chronicle, and a paper called the Weekly Dispatch, which no lady was supposed to read. And she had taken them upstairs and gone through them with a pair of scissors, like a woman looking for a dressmaker's notice. It had taken her the better part of a week to assemble the shape of the thing. A court was to be created. Not a bishop's court and not a private act of Parliament costing £800 and 3 years, and the interest of a peer, but a court, sitting in Westminster, open to anybody who could get a petition drawn. And at the bottom of one of the columns, in a sentence so dry that she had passed over it twice, was the date upon which the court would first sit, the 11th of January. She had gone to her writing desk and made a small mark in the corner of the blotter, and every night since then she had made another. And she had known at any hour of any day exactly how many were left. On the night of Lady Brancaster's ball, there were 83. That was why she had not been able to breathe in the ballroom when the Duke of Ravensmere crossed the floor and gave her the only number in the world she was already carrying. She thought about it all the following day. She thought about it while Lady Milbourne discussed the fishmonger's account with the housekeeper in the small parlor, and while her husband did not come down until 2, and while the rain came on at 4 and stopped at 5 and came on again. There were 3 possibilities, and she examined each of them like a woman turning over cloth. The first was that the Duke had discovered what she meant to do, which was impossible, because nobody knew. She had told no one. She had not written it down. The second was that he had said the date for some reason of his own that had nothing to do with her, a wager, a jest, a piece of business, and that she had simply been standing where it fell. The third possibility was one she did not permit herself to hold for more than a moment at a time, because it was warm, and warmth was how people were undone. At 9:30 that evening she went up to her dressing room and locked the door. It was a narrow room at the end of the north wing, with one window that looked over the mews and a fireplace that smoked. She had been given it in November of '51, and she had never once been visited in it. That was the great advantage of being surplus. A woman whom nobody wants is a woman nobody looks for. She knelt down by the window, put her thumbnail into the join, and lifted the 4th board from the wall. Underneath, in the cavity between the joists, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth that had once covered a jar of preserved plums, lay a packet of newspaper cuttings and a book. She did not take out the book. She put in the cutting from the 28th of August, folded small, and she sat back on her heels for a moment with her hand flat on the oilcloth, the way one puts a hand on a sleeping animal to be certain of it. Then she laid the board down and pressed it home with her heel until it sat flush and went to bed. 82. Lady Ferriby's musical evening was on the 9th of November, and Rosamond very nearly did not go. The bruise on the point of her cheekbone from the 11th of October had faded to nothing by then, which was fortunate because Lady Ferriby's rooms in Cavendish Square were lit like an operating theater, and her guests were seated in rows and could look at nothing but one another. But she had learned, in 6 years, that declining invitations produce more comment than accepting them. A wife who was seen was merely unfortunate. A wife who was not seen was being kept. So she went, and she sat at the end of the 4th row beside a marble column, and a Signora Pontecorvo sang 3 songs in Italian and 1 in German, and Rosamund did not hear a note of any of them. The Duke of Ravensmere arrived during the interval and did not look at her once. She counted. She was aware with some distaste that she was counting. He stood by the door with the Ferraby's eldest son and a Scotch member of Parliament, and he attended to them as though nothing else in the room existed, and he did not turn his head in her direction for 25 minutes. Then the second half began, and everybody sat, and there was 1 empty chair at the end of the 4th row. He did not ask leave to take it. He simply took it. The soprano started upon something slow. Rosamund looked directly ahead at the pianoforte and said nothing at all, and beside her the most feared man in England sat with his hands on his knees and did the same. And for the space of a whole song neither of them spoke, and she thought she might be sick. Then quite quietly, without turning his head, "Have you any witnesses?" Rosamund did not move. Afterwards she could not have said how long she sat there. The soprano finished the song and began another. Somebody 2 rows in front coughed and was hushed. She had prepared, over 4.5 years, for a great many questions. She had prepared for "What has he done to you?" and for "Why did you not leave?" and for "Are you certain you are not mistaken, my dear?" And she had answers ready for all of them, worn smooth from handling. Nobody had ever asked her that one. It was not a question about her suffering. It was a question about her case. "I beg your pardon?" she said. "No, you don't." He was still watching the pianoforte. "You understood me perfectly. You went white. Your Grace. There is a court from the 11th of January. A woman must prove adultery, and something further cruelty will serve. Adultery you may prove with a housemaid and a candle. Every servant in Grosvenor Street could swear to it tomorrow." He paused while the soprano took a high note and held it. "Cruelty is the difficulty. Cruelty happens behind doors. A bruise proves that a woman is bruised. It does not prove who did it, and a physician may be found to say she fell." Rosamund's hands were folded in her lap, and she could feel her own pulse in both her wrists. "So I ask again," he said, "have you any witnesses?" "You should not be speaking to me." "No, I should not." He said it without any inflection at all. "It is, I believe, the single most dangerous thing I could do to you, and I have thought about it for 7 weeks, and I have come to the conclusion that you will do this whether or not anybody helps you, and that you will do it badly and lose, and that I should rather be dangerous than watch that." The song ended. There was applause. He put his hands together twice with everybody else. "You are mistaken," Rosamund said under the noise. "I am not doing anything." "Then I have wasted an evening." He rose as the applause finished. "Ashgrove will be ruined before the year is out. The bank went to 10% mourning, and half the discount houses in Lombard Street are gone, and he is in a company that will not survive the week. A ruined man wants money. There is only one sum in that house he cannot reach." He looked down at her for the first time that evening, and it lasted perhaps a second. "You would do well to find out whether he has reached it." Then he made his bow to Lady Ferraby and went. Rosamund sat in the 4th row while the Signora sang the last of it, and she was frightened, and she was honest enough with herself to know why. She was not frightened because a stranger had spoken to her. She was frightened because he had asked the only question that mattered, and she already knew the answer, and the answer was 9. The Bank Act was suspended on the 12th of November. Rosamund learned this from the newspaper, as she learned everything, and it meant very little to her, beyond the fact that the men in the street outside Coots's were standing in a way men do not usually stand. In the house, it meant that her husband did not come home on the 12th at all, and came home on the 13th at 4 in the afternoon, and went into his study and shut the door, and did not come out. Lady Milbourne dined alone at 7. Rosamond dined in the north wing off a tray. Neither arrangement was remarked upon. They had been the arrangement for 4 years. At 20 minutes past 10, she came down the back stairs with the tray, because she had long ago stopped ringing for a servant to carry things that she could carry herself, and her husband was standing in the hall. He had been drinking, but he was not drunk. That was worse. Drunk, he was sentimental and slow. Sober and frightened, he became precise. "Where is the deed box?" he said. "Which deed box, my lord?" "The one from Lincoln's Inn." From the settlement, he came towards her. "There were 2 copies engrossed. Mine is in the study. Yours was sent to Kitesbourne, and your father is dead, and I want to know where it went. I have never seen it. You signed it." "I signed what I was told to sign in a room full of men when I was 17 years old." She set the tray down on the hall table because her hands had begun to want something to do. "I have never had it. I should not know it if I saw it." He looked at her for a long moment. "Nobody sends for it," he said half to himself. "In 6 years nobody has sent for it. Your brother never sent for it." "My brother is at Lucknow." "Your brother," said Rupert Vane, "is a great deal of use to everybody except me." And then, because the market had gone against him, and because a man had refused him at White's that afternoon in a voice pitched to Carrie, and because his wife was standing in his hall looking at him with an expression he could not read and had never been able to read, he hit her. It was open-handed, and it was hard, and it took her across the left side of the face and put her back against the hall table, so that the tray went over and the plate broke on the marble in 3 pieces. The house was entirely quiet. Rosamond did not cry out. She did not fall, though for a moment the floor was not where she had left it. She put one hand on the edge of the table and straightened, and the first thing she did was look at the clock. It was a long-case clock that had come from the Berkshire house, and it had a brass face, and it kept excellent time, and it said 24 minutes past 10. She held it in her mind. 10:24, 13th of November, the hall. Then, still holding it, she turned her head and looked past her husband, down the length of the hall, towards the door to the back stairs and the door to the drawing room, and the shadowed turn of the landing above. She was looking to see who was there. That was what Rupert Vane saw. His wife did not weep, and did not run, and did not put her hand to her face. She looked at a clock, and then she looked around the hall to see who else was in it, the way a man looks about him after a carriage accident to find out who witnessed it. He had struck her 11 times in 6 years, and she had never once done anything but shrink. Something went through him then, cold, from the scalp down, and he could not have named it and did not try. He said, "Get up to your rooms," which was foolish, because she was already standing. Then he went into the study and shut the door. Rosamond knelt down on the marble and picked up the 3 pieces of the plate, because if she left them, a maid would have to do it, and she carried them up the back stairs with the broken edges turned in towards her palm. 10:24. The hall. No one. She had it by heart before she reached the top. Martha Craik came at 11 with a basin, and she did not ask what had happened. That was the thing Rosamond noticed, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head tipped back and a cloth wrung out in cold water pressed under her eye. Martha had not knocked and inquired. She had not exclaimed. She had come up the north wing stairs at 11 o'clock at night, carrying a basin, a cloth, a bottle of arnica, and a pair of scissors, which meant that she had assembled them before she came, which meant that she had assembled them before she knew. "Hold that where it is," Martha said. "Don't press. Pressing spreads it. You have said that before." "I have." "How many times?" Martha wrung out the cloth again in the basin. She was 51, a Lincolnshire woman with a flat voice and forearms like a laundress, and she had been at Ashgrove House 4 months longer than Rosamond had. "It'll show tomorrow," she said. Not much. High up like that, it comes out yellow before it comes out blue, and yellow takes powder better. Martha, you'll want to be out of the house Thursday and Friday and back by Saturday. Say you have a cold. If you say a cold, nobody sends anybody. Rosamond lowered the cloth and looked at her. There was a way of talking about a thing that people arrived at only after long practice, in which all the questions had been asked so many years ago that nobody bothered with them anymore, and only the arrangements remained. Martha was speaking in it. She had been speaking in it for some time, and Rosamond had never once heard it. "How long have you been counting?" she said. For the first time Martha's hand stopped. "Since March of '53, my lady," she said. "Same as you." The room was very cold. The flues on the north side had never drawn. "Get to bed," Martha said, and picked up the basin. "It'll be worse in the morning, and better by Sunday." "It always is." She went out, and the door clicked, and her feet went away down the passage, and Rosamond sat where she was for a long time. Then she got up, took the candle to the dressing room, locked the door, knelt down by the window, and lifted the fourth board from the wall. She took out the oilcloth packet and set it on the floorboards and unwrapped it, and beneath the cuttings, at the bottom, was the book. It was not a handsome book. It had cost 1 shilling and 9pence at a stationer's in Newbury in the spring of '53, and it was bound in marbled boards that had gone soft at the corners, and it was the sort of thing a farmer keeps for tallying stock. Rosamond opened it on her knee and turned past the pages that were full, which was most of them, until she came to the first blank line. She dipped her pen, then she wrote, in a small upright hand that had not altered in 4.5 years. No, 43, it was not a diary. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed, opening it. And it was the thing Rosamond had decided upon before she wrote a word in it. Kneeling on the floor of a bedroom in Berkshire, in the March of '53, with a 1 shilling and 9 account book she had bought without knowing why. A diary was a place where a woman put her feelings. Rosamond had read her sister's once, at 14, and had been struck even then by how little of it could be proved. It was full of he seemed and I felt, and I am sure that. A diary was a record of a person's interior, and a person's interior was precisely the thing that nobody in England would ever take her word for. So she had ruled the pages with a straight edge into 7 columns, and at the head of the columns, in ink, she had written: date, hour, place, what was done, persons within hearing, physicians sent for, remarks. And beneath the last column she had written a note to herself which she had never afterwards needed to consult, because she had it by heart. Nothing that I think, only what could be sworn to by another. She wrote out no. 43 now by the light of 1 candle, and it took her 4 minutes. 13 Nov 1857. 10.24 p.m. The hall at Grosvenor St. 1 blow, open hand, left side of face. LDA had come from the study, had asked for the settlement deed box, and been told I had never seen it. Persons within hearing, none seen. Broken plate left on floor 6 minutes, taken up by me. Physician, none. Remarks, he said my brother was of use to everybody but him. Then she turned the book back to the beginning, as she did perhaps twice a year, because it was necessary from time to time to look at the whole of a thing. Noble one. 14 March 1853, 9.4 p.m. North Passage at Ashgrove Hoe. Persons within hearing, none. She had been 19 years old. It had been 3 days after her birthday. The entries after that ran on in the same hand, at the same slope, 160 small lines of them, 4.5 years wide. They were not all blows. She had understood very early that if she wrote down only the blows, she would have a short book and a weak one, And so she had written down everything that a woman might one day need to prove. Number 4. Sent from the table before the fish, in presence of lie. M and 2 guests LDA saying I was not well, I was well. Number 9. Bedroom door locked from without between 6 p. M and 9 the following morning.
Chamber pot not emptied.
Tried the door 4 times. No 17. Allowance for the quarter not ply paid. Had asked twice, was told I had no need of money as I went nowhere. Number 22, LD in my room at 2 a.m. Took the candle away and stood in the doorway some minutes. Said nothing. Went out. Left the door open. Number 26 was struck once with the back of the hand across the mouth. Physician, Dr. Halloran, sent for by LDA at 11 the next morning. Dr. H wrote in his book that I had a fall on the stair. He did not ask me anything. He was in the room 8 minutes. Number 31. Told that if I wrote to my brother again, the letters would be read first. Some of the entries were 4 lines long. Some were 1. There were months together with nothing at all. And she had gone on ruling the columns through those months, because she had learned that the empty stretches were as much a part of the record as the full ones. A court would want to know that a woman had not been beaten daily for 4 years, because a woman beaten daily for 4 years is not believed. 9 of them had a name in the 5th column. 9, in 4.5 years, were somebody who was not Rosamond and was not Rupert had been near enough to hear. She turned back to the inside of the front cover. There were 2 things written there in 2 different inks. The upper was black and had faded to a soft brown at the edges of the strokes. The lower was a bluer ink, and it was newer by 2 years, and anybody who knew anything about ink could have told at a glance that they had not been written on the same day or in the same season or with the same pen. The upper was in the round, slightly childish hand of a girl of 19. It said only, "Because I shall forget, and then he will say I imagined it, and I shall not be able to prove that I did not." The lower, from the autumn of 55, was smaller and harder, and had been written by a woman who had just put down a newspaper. It said, "A wife in England is not a person. She cannot sue, or hold a shilling, or give evidence, or be believed." Very well, then I shall exist on paper. Rosamond closed the book, wrapped it in the oilcloth, and put it under the floor. She had been keeping a court's records for 4.5 years before there was a court. The chambers were in Knightrider Street, in the shadow of St. Paul's, in a range of old buildings that had been called Doctors' Commons since before anybody now alive was born, and Rosamond had never in her life heard of it. The Duke's note had said only, 3 o'clock Thursday, Mr. Ezra Fenwick, 4 Knightrider St. Take a cab. Do not walk from Grosvenor Street. You will be seen. He had not signed it. Mr. Fenwick was a proctor. Rosamond did not know what a proctor was and said so, and the old man behind the desk smiled at her with what appeared to be real pleasure. Nor will anybody, madam, in 5 years' time. It is an ecclesiastical practitioner. We have had the marriages and the wills and the sailors' prize money in this building for 600 years, and in January the Act takes the whole of it away and gives it to the common lawyers. And this house will be sold and pulled down. He set his spectacles on the desk. You are looking at a man being abolished. It is a curious sensation. I am 60, and I find I have a great deal of time. He had white side whiskers and a black coat gone green at the elbows, and the room smelled of dust and sealing wax. His Grace tells me you are proposing to petition. His Grace presumes. His Grace generally does. Fenwick folded his hands. Nevertheless, since you have come as far as Knightrider Street, in a cab you did not need to take, let us assume for the sake of argument that you are, and let me tell you what it will cost you. Not in money. We shall come to money. And then, for 40 minutes, in the flat voice of a man reading out a list of goods, Ezra Fenwick told her the law. A husband who wishes to be rid of his wife must prove one thing, her adultery. He proves it, and he is free. A wife who wishes to be rid of her husband must prove too, his adultery, and then something more. Cruelty will do. Desertion for 2 years will do. Bigamy or incest or unnatural crime. But she must have the second thing, or she has nothing. And the second thing is the whole battle, because the first is easy and everybody knows it. I can prove the first, Rosamond said. Of course you can. She has lived in your house since 52 and half of Mayfair has dined with her at your table. He waved it away. Madam, you could prove the first with a chambermaid. The first is not your difficulty. Attend to me now, because this is the part that ruins them. There is a doctrine called collusion. It means an agreement between the parties to procure the decree. If the court finds that the husband and wife have arranged the case between them, or that the husband knew and did not object, or that some third person has procured or funded or connived at the proceeding, then the petition is dismissed, not adjourned. Dismissed, and it cannot be brought again. And the act does not leave it to the other side to raise. It puts a duty on the court itself to inquire, of its own motion, whether there has been any such agreement, and the judge will inquire, madam, because this is a new court and the whole nation is watching to see whether it will be a court of law or a shop. He picked up his spectacles and put them down again. So, if you petition, you must be able to swear, and to satisfy a judge who does not wish to be made a fool of, that no arrangement of any kind exists between you and your husband, that nobody has paid for you, that nobody has advised you in a manner that could be called procuring, that there is not, anywhere in the world, one man with an interest in the outcome standing behind your shoulder. Rosamond sat very still. His Grace, she said. Fenwick agreed, is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to you, and I have told him so, and he knows it better than I do. If Ashgrove's counsel can put it to the court that the Duke of Ravensmere had a hand in this, you will not lose gracefully. You will lose finally, and you will go home to Grosvenor Street, and there will be no second court. Then why am I here? Because you are going to do it anyway. He said it without any particular emphasis. He told me that on Tuesday, and I did not believe him. I have now been in a room with you for half an hour. Rosamond looked at the window, which was small and gray, and gave on to a wall. Mr. Fenwick, what must I have? Witnesses, madam. The old man's voice did not change at all. That is the whole of it. Not a sad story. Every woman in England has a sad story, and the courts have been hearing them since the Conquest and doing nothing whatever about them. You must have persons living, findable, willing to come into a public room and swear on oath to a thing they saw with their own eyes on a date they can name. The new act does not give you your freedom. Let us be perfectly clear about that, because a great many women are going to be disappointed in the next 12 months. It gives you somewhere to put evidence. That is all it gives you. It is a table, madam, and it is empty. And if you have nothing to set upon it, you will have gone to Westminster to be humiliated in front of the newspapers for nothing at all. He leaned back. Have you anything to set upon the table? Rosamond opened her reticule and took out a book bound in marbled boards, gone soft at the corners, and put it on the desk in front of him and turned it round so that it faced him. Ezra Fenwick read for 10 minutes without speaking. Then he took off his spectacles and set them down, and Rosamond saw that his hand was not steady. 43 entries, said Fenwick, on the 5th of January. I have gone through them twice. Sit down, this will take some time, and none of it is pleasant. He had covered the desk with slips of paper, each one bearing a number. Of the 43, 11 are blows. 14 are confinement to a room. 6 are the withholding of money. The remainder are various the letters opened. The public dismissals from table, the business with the candle at 2 in the morning, which I may say is worth more than 3 of the blows, because a judge will understand it instantly, and a jury of matrons would have him hanged for it. There is no jury. There is not. Mr. Justice Cresswell alone, and he is said to be a cold man, and I thank God for it. Warm judges believe stories. Cold ones believe dates. He moved the slips into 2 heaps. Now, column 5. Persons within hearing. Persons within hearing. Madam, this book is a marvel, and it will not save you by itself, because a court cannot convict a man on his wife's own account of what he did to her. That is the law, and I did not make it. Everything in these pages must be corroborated from the mouth of somebody else, or it is a woman's assertion, and a woman's assertion is worth precisely nothing at all. He put his hand flat on the smaller heap. You have 9 entries with a name in the 5th column. 9 out of 43. I know. Of the 9, the footman James Peart left in 54, and I am told went for a soldier, and I shall try, but I do not expect much. The kitchen maid Sarah Yeo was sent away in 55 without a character. The under housemaid Bright is dead of the cholera. That is 3 gone before we begin. And Dr. Halloran, said Rosamond. Fenwick's mouth went thin, yes. Dr. Cornelius Halloran, of Wimpole Street, who attended you upon 4 occasions, and wrote in his daybook that you had fallen down the stair, fallen against a door, fallen in the garden, and been overcome by the heat, and who has had 120 pounds a year from your husband since 52 for attending a household of 3 persons in good health. He looked up. He is the only medical man who has ever seen your injuries. He will be called by the other side, and he will destroy you, and there is nothing I can do about that, except be ready for it. Then what is left? Craik, said Fenwick. Martha Craik, your maid, who appears in 6 of the 9, and who has been in that house since before your marriage. He set the slip down in the middle of the desk between them, alone. Everything you have rests on one woman of 51, who has no money, no protector, and no character, but the one your husband can take away from her with a sentence. That is your case, madam. It is thin as paper. It is also better than any petition I have seen this month, and I have seen 11. Rosamond walked back along Knight-Trider Street in the fog with her hands in her muff and did not take a cab for a quarter of a mile. The Duke's carriage was standing at the corner of Godleyman Street, and the door opened as she came level with it, and she stopped. Not inside, she said. You know I cannot. No. He got down instead, and shut the door, and stood on the pavement with her in the fog where anybody might see them, and where nothing whatever could be alleged. How many? 9 names. 2 are dead or gone. 1 was dismissed without a character. 1 is bought. Mr. Fenwick says the case is Martha Craik and a book. Mr. Fenwick is right. They stood. A brewer's dray went past, and the fog closed behind it. Your Grace, Rosamond said, I am going to ask you a question, and I have been carrying it since October, and if you do not answer it truthfully, I shall go to Mr. Fenwick tomorrow and take the whole of it out of your hands and manage it alone and badly. Ask 6 years. She heard her own voice go flat and hard and did not try to soften it. You have been in the same rooms as I have been in for 6 years. You knew where I lived. You knew what he was. You have said as much to my face. You told me in November that a ruined man wants money and where he would go for it. And you were right. And you have evidently known the shape of that house better than I have. And in 6 years you did not speak to me once. Not one word. Not a note. Not a warning. Not so much as a look I could have made use of. The fog moved between them. I want to know what kind of man watches a thing like that for 6 years, she said, and does nothing. Gideon Marchcroft did not answer at once. When he did, his voice had changed, and it was the only time in all that winter that she heard it do so. The kind, he said, who did something once. He told her standing on the pavement in Godleman Street. because there was nowhere else on earth the two of them could safely be. I had a sister, he said, Aurelia. She was 6 years younger than I am. In '47, she married Sir Everard Pike, and I gave her away. And I thought him a fool and did not think him anything worse. And I was 30, and I believed that I could not be materially wrong about a man for very long. By the summer of '48, she had stopped writing to me. In the November, she came to Ravensmere House for 3 days and would not take off her gloves at dinner. In March of '49, I went to Hertfordshire, and I took my own carriage and 4 of my own men. And I knocked Pike down in his own hall in front of his servants. And I put my sister into the carriage and brought her to London. And I remember being perfectly certain the whole way that I had done the one thing needful, and that it was finished. He stopped. Pike went to Doctors' Commons and filed a suit for restitution of conjugal rights. I do not know what that is. It is a decree that a wife shall return to her husband and live with him. It has existed for centuries. Any husband may have one for the asking, and if she does not go, she may be attached for contempt and imprisoned until she does. I put every man of business I have upon it. I engaged 4 counsel. I spent in 11 weeks something over £9,000, and the court granted it, said Gideon. As I was told at the outset that it would by everybody I asked, in language of great sympathy. There was no defense in law. A wife's person belongs to her husband. There was authority for it not 10 years old, a case where a man had shut his wife up in his house, and the judges held he had the right of it. My sister had no cause of action because a married woman in England has no cause of action because she is not a person. Aurelia was sent back to Hertfordshire in September of '49 in a hired carriage, and she was 22 years old. She died in the January. Rosamond did not say anything at all. The proctor who lost that suit, he said, was Ezra Fenwick. He was very good. It made no difference. Nothing would have made a difference, but he has not forgiven himself for it in 9 years, and neither, as you may have observed, have I. He looked away down Godalming Street into the fog. So you ask me what kind of man watches for 6 years. I will tell you exactly. The kind who has learnt what his help is worth. I could not have got you out of that house in '52 or '54 or last month. There was no door. If I had come for you, Ashgrove would have gone to Nightrider Street within the week and had you back inside a month, and you would have been sent home to a man who had been publicly humiliated, and I should have done to you precisely what I did to my sister. So I did the only thing that was left, which was to wait for the law to change, and to be able to tell you the day it did. That is all the 11th of January was. I could not buy you a court. I could only tell you when one was coming. He turned back. And now that it is coming, madam, I am the greatest danger in your life. Fenwick has told you why. If Ashgrove's counsel can put it to Cresswell that there was an understanding between us, you are finished, and I cannot repair it with money, because money is the thing they will be looking for. Then what do you propose? That we do not meet again, said the Duke of Ravensmere. Not once, from the day you file until the day it ends. No letter, no message, no man of mine within a mile of Nightrider Street. Not 1 shilling of my money in your case. Fenwick will take his fee out of Ashgrove's costs if you win, and out of nothing at all if you lose. And he has agreed to it, and I am forbidden to make it up to him afterwards. If we are in the same room, you will not look at me. The fog was in her throat. For how long? Until it is over. It will take the better part of a year, and if I lose, then you will have lost it honestly, he said, which is the only way it can be won. He handed her into a cab himself, in the open street, in full view of the drayman and a crossing sweeper and 2 clerks going home, and shut the door and stepped back. She did not see him again for 187 days. For 6 months, Rosamond had read the deaths before she read anything else. It was not a thing she had decided to do. It had begun in the June, when the first accounts came of the business at Meerut, and it had hardened into a rule by the August. And by the December of 57, she took the paper straight to the back column and went down it with her finger, and did not stop to breathe until she reached the end. The Residency at Lucknow had been shut up since the 30th of June. That was the difficulty, and everybody understood it. Nothing came out. A garrison under siege cannot send returns. The returns are made up inside the walls, and they sit there. Havelock's people had fought their way in at the end of September, and had then been besieged in their turn. And it was November before Sir Colin Campbell got the women and the wounded out. And only then did the lists begin to come home, 6 weeks in the steamer and the overland post, and some of the names on them 4 and 5 months old before ever they were set in type in London. The 32nd foot had been in that Residency from the first day. Rosamond found her brother's name on the second Wednesday in December in the 3rd column between a Corporal Ellerby and a Private Ellis. Captain Theodore Ellery, 32nd Regiment of Foot, 30th July. She sat in the north wing with the paper on her knee, and the fire had gone down, and she did not ring. He had been dead since the 30th of July. He had been dead all through August, while she cut a paragraph out of the Times and folded it small. He had been dead in October, when a duke crossed a ballroom to give her a date. He had been dead on the 13th of November at 24 minutes past 10 in the hall at Grosvenor Street, when her husband said that her brother was of use to everybody except him. 4 months and 12 days, and she had gone on thinking about him in the present tense, and there had been nothing there to think about. That was the thing she could not get round. Not the grief. The grief came later and was ordinary. It was the arithmetic. A man dies on the far side of the world in July, and his sister does not know it until December, and in between she writes him a letter in September, which is going the other way in the hold of a ship, and there is nothing to be done about it, and there never has been. He had come home once, wounded in the spring of 55. He had been at Inkerman with the 55th on the 5th of November, in that murdering business among the rocks, and had taken a Russian bayonet through the meat of the hip, and had been sent home to Aldershot to mend. Rosamond had gone down to see him in the April, alone, having said she was visiting a cousin. He was thinner, and he had begun to go gray at 27, and he was in a great deal of pain and would not say so. They walked out on the heath because he could not sit still, and at some point she had put up her hand to shade her eyes, and her cuff had gone back. She had known it once. She had put the hand down. It had been too late. Theo had stopped walking. How long? How long, Roz? 2 years. He had not shouted. That was the frightening part. She had expected shouting and could have managed it. He had stood on the heath at Aldershot with his weight on the sound leg and said, quite conversationally, "I shall go up on Thursday and kill him." And she had understood that he meant it in the plainest sense available. It had taken her 4 hours to talk him out of it, and she had done it, in the end, with the only argument that had ever worked on Theo, which was arithmetic. "You will hang," she had said, "or you will be broke and transported, and I shall be the widow of a man everyone will say deserved it. And I shall be exactly where I am now, with the addition of having killed my brother. There is no court, Theo. Do you understand me? There is no court in England I can take him to. A private act cost £800 and 3 years in the interest of a peer, and 4 women have ever had one. There is nothing. There is no door." And Theo had looked at the heath for a long while. "Then write it down," he had said. "What?" "All of it. Dates and hours. And who was standing where. Not what you felt. Nobody cares a damn what women feel. They've made that clear enough." What was done and who saw it. He had turned round. The law's not sacred, Rose. It's just old. They change it every year. They changed the whole of the criminal law while I was at school. One day they will change this one, and when they do, every woman in England will stand up with a broken heart and nothing else and be sent home. You keep the book. When there's a court, I shall come home and swear to every word of it that I can. He had exchanged into the 32nd that autumn, because it was under orders for India, and an officer with no money gets his step by going where the fever is. She had seen him off at Southampton in the February of '56. He had stood at the rail and shouted something down that she had not been able to hear over the winch. He had never known that she had begun the book 3 years before he asked her to. 640 shares, said Fenwick, in a thing called the Anglo-Continental Submarine Telegraph and Cable Company, incorporated in November of '56 under the new Act, registered offices in Threadneedle Street. Capital nominally £200,000. Your husband holds 640, and he holds them upon a 15% call. Do you know what that means? No. It means he has paid £3 a share and has undertaken to pay 17 more when the directors ask for it. Fenwick put the register down. The directors asked for it on the 2nd of November. It was the 7th of January, and there was ice inside the window at Nightrider Street. The whole of it had been in the papers for 2 years, and Rosamond had read the papers, and had thought about it as everybody thought about it, as a wonder, a thing to be proud of. A wire from Ireland to Newfoundland, 2,000 miles of it in the hold of a ship, and a message to America in a quarter of an hour, and the Times had said that the Atlantic would be no wider than the Thames. They had gone out with it in the August of '57, and the cable had parted in 2,000 fathoms, 380 miles out, and had gone down and was lying still. And the men who had put their money into the little companies that clustered round the great one, the Cable Hemp and the Gutta Percha and the shore stations, and the Anglo-Continental Submarine Telegraph and Cable Company of Threadneedle Street, had waited to see what would happen to the price. And then in November the bank had gone to 10%, and Lombard Street had gone down like a row of skittles. And nothing whatever had happened to the price, because there was no longer any price. He is called upon for £11,000, said Fenwick. He has not got it. He has a mortgaged estate in Berkshire, a leasehold in Grosvenor Street with 11 years to run, and, on the face of it, nothing else. On the face of it. On the face of it. The old man turned a page. Which brings us to the only clean money in his life, madam, and to the reason I have been 3 weeks in the Bank of England transfer office, being disliked by clerks. There is a sum of £4,000 in the 3% consols, settled at your marriage to your separate use, which he may not touch, may not borrow against, may not so much as look at sideways. On the 22nd of September last, £400 of it was sold out. Rosamond said, "That is not possible." "It is entirely possible. It is done every day. It requires only the trustee's hand." Fenwick took off his spectacles. "Madam, where is your brother?" There was a silence of some length in the cold little room. "He is dead," Rosamond said. "It was in the list on the 9th of December. He died at Lucknow." "On what date?" "The 30th of July." Ezra Fenwick sat quite still. Then he put his spectacles back on, and drew a sheet of paper towards him, and dipped his pen. And his voice, when it came, was not the voice he had used in that room before. "Madam, I am going to ask you to be very exact, and then I am going to Chancery Lane, and I may be some hours." "When did you last have a letter from him?" "The 11th of June. It was written in May, and it is now the 7th of January, and he died on the 30th of July, and the whole nation is subscribing to a wire that will carry a word across an ocean in a quarter of an hour." He blotted the sheet. "Kindly wait here. Do not go out and do not tell anybody where you have been." He came back at 7 in the evening with a candle end burning down in a saucer and a copy of a deed, and he laid it on the desk and turned it round so that it faced her, exactly as she had turned the ledger round for him in November. It was one sheet, engrossed on parchment, with a red wafer at the foot, an authority to the trustee to sell out £400 consols from the trust created by the settlement of the 14th October 1851, and to pay the proceeds to Rupert Vane, Viscount Ashgrove, upon the security of his bond. It was dated the 12th of September, 1857. At the bottom, in a strong forward-sloping hand with a long tail to the Y, was written, "Theodore Ellery, capt. 32nd Rect." Rosamond looked at it for a long time. "That is his hand," she said at last, and her voice sounded strange to her. "It is a good copy of his hand. I dare say it took some practice. There will be letters in that house he could work from." Fenwick sat down heavily. "Madam, attend to me, because you have not yet seen it, and when you do see it, you will want to stand up, and I would rather you did not, because these chairs are old. It does not matter whose hand it is." "I do not." "It does not matter," said Fenwick, "because on the 12th of September, 1857, Captain Theodore Ellery had been dead 6 weeks and 2 days. Nobody in England will be asked to compare handwriting. Nobody will call a bank clerk to swear he knows a signature. I shall go to the Horse Guards, and I shall obtain a certified return from the muster rolls of the 32nd Regiment of Foot, and it will state the date. And I shall put that return in front of Mr. Justice Cresswell beside this deed. And there will be nothing whatever to argue about, because a dead man cannot execute a deed. That, madam, is forgery. It is not a matrimonial cruelty, and it is not a slander, and it is not something a gentleman settles quietly. It is a felony, and until 9 years ago they hanged for it, and they still send men across the sea for the whole of their lives." Rosamond found that she had stood up after all. "Then it is finished," she said. "Then I have him." "No," said Ezra Fenwick. He said it gently, which was worse. "Sit down. There is a second half to this, and it is the reason I have been 6 hours and not 2. A married woman in England is not a person. We have had this conversation. You did not much care for it the first time. She cannot contract, she cannot sue, she cannot hold a shilling in her own right. Everything that belongs to her husband, and mark this, everything he does with what belongs to her, he does as her head and her representative in law. There is £400 of trust money in that man's hands. It was drawn on a deed bearing your brother's name, and it was drawn for the benefit of your husband, and the whole of it lay for 11 days in an account at Coutts's, in the name of Lord Ashgrove, and the bond he gave for it recites, I have it here, that the loan is made at the request and for the necessary provision of his wife. You are on the face of that instrument, not as a party, as a reason. He turned the deed over. If this goes to the Old Bailey before your petition is heard, his counsel will say, and say with a straight face, that Lady Ashgrove knew of the arrangement, that she had the benefit of it, that she raised no objection for 4 months, and that this is a family matter got up between a wife and a duke to blacken a ruined man. And a jury may well believe him, because a wife cannot give evidence for or against her husband in a criminal cause, and you will sit in that court with your mouth shut while they discuss you. He drowns, madam, and you are tied to him at the wrist. The candle end went out. Fenwick did not light another. So we shall not go to the Old Bailey, he said in the dark. Not first. We shall go to Westminster on the 11th of January with a petition for divorce, and we shall keep this deed in a locked box, and we shall bring it out at the moment when his counsel is standing up, telling Cresswell what a gentleman his client is. Do you understand me? Yes. You are quite certain? It will mean sitting still for some months knowing what you know. Mr. Fenwick, said Rosamond, I have sat still for 6 years knowing rather worse. Rupert Vane had signed his wife's brother's name at 11:15 on the night of the 12th of September, and had gone to bed and had slept. That was the part he could never afterwards explain to himself. He had expected not to sleep. He had made a private allowance, for it had told himself, sitting at the desk with the pen in his hand and the letters spread out for the loops of the capitals, that a man does a thing like this and pays for it in the small hours for the rest of his life. He had slept 9 hours and woken hungry. It was 400 pounds. That was the whole of it, and nobody would ever understand. And he had long ago given up trying to make anybody understand. 400 pounds. Out of 4,000 that were sitting at consoles, doing nothing whatever, belonging to a woman who did not want anything and never had, held by a man in India who would not look at the accounts before the spring, and probably not then. He was not stealing it. He would put it back in the March out of the Berkshire rents, and the trust would never be a farthing short. And by then the wire would be up, and the shares would be at a premium, and the entire episode would have been a piece of housekeeping. He had believed that. He wanted it understood, in whatever court a man is finally tried in, that on the 12th of September, 1857, he had entirely believed it. The letter came on the 23rd of October. It was from Wetherall of the 32nd, who had been got out with the wounded and had written from Calcutta to a dozen people, because that is what one does. And among the dozen was a man who had been at school with Rupert Vane, and who forwarded it with 3 lines of his own. Ellery went on the 30th July. Sniper on the roof of the brigade mess. Very quick. He had been in the Residency from the first day and had done a great deal. Rupert read it standing up in the hall at Grosvenor Street, with his hat still on, and what went through him was not grief and was not fear. It was relief. It came up out of the floor and filled him to the collarbone, a pure, hot, physical relief, of a kind he had not felt since he was a boy, and a letter had failed to arrive from a tutor. There was no trustee. There would be no letter in the spring. There would be no examination of the accounts, no awkward interview in a regimental mess, no explanation ever required of anybody, because the only man in the world entitled to ask the question was lying under earth 4,500 miles away. He stood in his own hall and was glad that a young man he had dined with twice was dead. Then he went into the study and shut the door and was sick in the coal scuttle. He drank steadily for 11 days after that. He drank because the relief kept coming back, and because each time it came back it brought with it, at the tail, a perfectly clear picture of the sort of creature that could feel such a thing. And the picture would not go away, and the brandy made it go away for about 40 minutes at a time. On the 2nd of November, the directors called for the 17 pounds a share. On the 9th, the bank went to 10%. On the 13th, he came home at 4 in the afternoon from White's, where Colonel Fanshawe had declined to see him across a room of 60 people, and he sat in the study until 10. And then he went out into the hall to look for the second copy of the settlement deed, because it had occurred to him in the 4th hour that if there were a second copy anywhere with his wife's people, then somebody someday might set 2 dates side by side. And his wife was standing in the hall with a tray. He asked her where it was. She said she had never seen it, and she was telling the truth. And he knew she was telling the truth, and he hit her anyway. He would have said if anybody had asked him, and nobody ever did. And that was rather the trouble with his whole life, that he had hit her because she was insolent. She had not been insolent. She had been standing there with a tray, telling him a thing he already knew, and looking at him with those flat gray eyes that had been looking at him since '53, and had never once asked him for anything. He hit her because he had discovered, 3 weeks earlier, that he was safe. That was all it was. A man who is frightened is careful. A man who has just been made safe by the death of the only witness in the world discovers that he may do as he likes, and the discovery is intoxicating, and it wants using. Then she looked at the clock. Then she looked round the hall to see who was there. Rupert Vane went into his study and shut the door and stood with his back against it for some time, and he was frightened in a new way that he could not put a name to and did not have the habit of examining. He was not a wicked man. He had never in his life set out to be a wicked man. He was a man who had wanted £4,000 and had taken 400 of it, and everything else had happened by itself. She went into the study at 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 8th of January. She had not been through that door in 6 years and 2 months. She had stood outside it a great many times, and she had formed, without meaning to, a picture of what lay on the other side, and the picture turned out to be entirely wrong. She had imagined something formidable. It was a shabby room with a bad carpet, and there were racing books on the shelf where the law books ought to have been, and the window looked over the mews, and there was a sash of 8 panes across, and 6 down, which she counted before she had got the door shut. 48. It steadied her, as it always did. Her husband was at the desk with a decanter and a great many papers, and he looked up, and for a moment he genuinely did not understand what he was seeing. "Get out, no," said Rosamond. She crossed the room and set the ledger down on the desk in front of him, square, with the marbled boards facing up, and put one hand flat on it. "I am filing a petition for divorce," she said on the 11th of January, "on the grounds of adultery and cruelty. Mr. Ezra Fenwick of Nightrider Street has the drafting of it, and Mr. Alban Reeve will be my counsel. There are 43 entries in this book. There are 9 witnesses. You will be served on the 12th or the 13th, and I did not think you should hear it first from a clerk." The room was very quiet, somewhere below a door shut. Rupert Vane looked at the book, and then at his wife, and then he laughed. It was not bravado. That was what took the ground out from under her. He laughed the way a man laughs at a child who has come downstairs to announce that she is running away to sea, with a kind of exhausted affection, and he sat back in the chair and put his hand over his eyes for a moment. "Oh, Rosamond," he said. Then he took his hand away and became businesslike, and she saw that he had been ready for this, and that he had been ready for it for some weeks, and that whatever he had spent the winter drinking over, it had not been idleness. "Sit down." "No?" "Very well. 3 things, and then you may go up and think about them. First, I do not know what your Mr. Fenwick has told you about the new act, but he has plainly not told you about the old law, which is not repealed. A husband is entitled to the custody of his wife's person. There is authority for it, and it is not old authority. If a wife absents herself, he may go to the court and have a decree that she return, and if she does not return, she may be attached for contempt and committed to prison until she does. That is not a threat, my dear. It is simply the law of England, and any of the 4 men you have hired can confirm it for you in a sentence. I am aware of it." That checked him, very slightly. He went on second. "Dr. Halloran attended you in 54 and 55 and twice in 56, and has recorded on each occasion that you had suffered a fall, and has recorded besides, and I have read it, because it is my house, and he is my physician, and his daybook is my property, a nervous excitability of some years' standing, with periods of morbid seclusion and an unnatural habit of writing." Rosamond did not move. "An unnatural habit of writing," said Rupert. "He put that down in 55. Not I. He noticed it, and he wrote it in his book 2 years before you or I ever discussed it. Third, he opened the drawer at his right hand and took out a single sheet, folded, and held it up between two fingers without unfolding it. The act requires 2 medical certificates. Only 2, from any 2 practitioners, and they need not consult each other. Dr. Halloran has signed one. It cost me nothing, he offered. He put it down on the desk, next to the ledger, so that the 2 things lay side by side. There is a house at Brentford, he said. It is a private establishment, licensed, entirely respectable. 14 ladies. The terms are $200 a year, and the situation is very pleasant, and the grounds run down to the river. So by all means file whatever you like, my dear. He pushed the ledger an inch back towards her with one finger. From in there, Rosamond stood with her hand on the desk and understood, with a completeness that made her feel almost calm, several things at once. That he was not bluffing because he did not need to bluff. The thing cost him $200 a year and 1 signature and no explanation to anybody. That there was no court in the world she could go to before the 11th of January, because there was no court until the 11th of January. And that the most powerful man in England could do nothing whatever about any of it. He could not come to Grosvenor Street. He could not send a servant or a solicitor or a note. Everything he had, the acres, the ground rents, the seat in the Lords, the whole apparatus that had brought down a cabinet minister in '53 was worth precisely and exactly nothing, because the one thing it could not buy was for her to have got here without him. He had told her so himself in the fog, in Godalming Street. She had not understood it until this moment. Lady Milbourne was standing in the doorway. Rosamond did not know how long she had been there. She was in gray, with her hands loose at her sides, and she had come down without a candle, although the passage behind her was dark, which meant she had come quietly, which meant she had come some minutes ago. Rupert did not look round. Camilla, go up. She did not go up. And Rosamond, standing at the desk with her hand on a 1.09 account book, did the arithmetic in about 4 seconds, and it came out, and she opened the book. She did not open it at random. She had known the number since the 7th of January, since a cold room in Nightrider Street and a candle end in a saucer, and she had gone up to the north wing that night and lifted the 4th board and found it and sat on the floor and read it 11 times. Number 39, she said. Her voice came out steady and rather flat, which was how she read it, because she had written it to be read flatly. 12th of September, 1857. Bedroom door locked from without at 6 o'clock. Tried it at 6:10 and at 7:30. Not opened until 8:20 the following morning. Persons within hearing, and their movements as heard from the north passage. That will do, said Rupert. Study bell rung at 9:04. Lady M went down the back stair at 9:09. I know her step, and she was in the slippers with the hard heel. She did not come up again until 10:08. 49 minutes. Remarks. The study fire was made up twice. I heard the scuttle. At some time before 10, there was a smell of sealing wax in the passage, which does not usually reach so far, so the study door stood open. Rosamond closed the book. That is the whole of the entry, she said. It is 4 lines long. I wrote it because I write down every night I am locked in, and I write down who moves about the house on those nights, because one day I shall need to say who might have heard me trying the door. I did not know what else I was writing. Nobody in the room said anything at all. Rosamond turned round to the woman in the doorway, and she spoke to her without heat, in the voice of somebody reading out a column of figures at the foot of an account. Lady Milbourne, on the 12th of September you were in the room for 49 minutes, between 9 and 10 at night, and a deed was executed in it bearing my brother's signature, and my brother had been dead since the 30th of July. It is in the hands of my proctor, with a certified return from the Horse Guards. It has been in his hands since Thursday. You did not sign it. There is nothing in my book that says you signed it, or that you were told what it was, or that you knew, but you were in the room, and the fire was made up twice, and the wax was hot, and the door stood open. And when a man is tried at the Old Bailey for forgery, the first question his counsel is asked by everybody in England is who else was there. She put the ledger under her arm. "That is all," she said. "I am not asking you for anything. I would not know how." Camilla Vaux stood in the doorway for perhaps 3 seconds more. Then she took one step to the left, out of it, into the dark of the passage, and stood there with her hands still loose at her sides. That was all she did. She said nothing, and she did not look at Rupert, and she did not look at Rosamond. She simply ceased to be standing in the way. It was enough. Rosamond walked out of the study and up the north wing stairs, and Martha Craik was on the landing with a candle and a face like a Sunday sermon, and between them they had the trunk down in 50 minutes. She took 2 gowns, the plain gray and the black, her mother's garnet brooch, a shawl, 11 letters from her brother, the ledger, and £32 4 shillings, which was the whole of the last 2 quarters' income from the consuls, and which she had not spent because there had been nothing in 6 years that she had wanted to buy. She left everything else. The hall clock said 24 minutes past 10 as she went out, which she noticed and did not record. 3 days later, on the 11th of January, Ezra Fenwick filed her petition. 3 days after that, on the 14th, Rupert Vane filed a suit for the restitution of conjugal rights, praying that his wife be required to return to him and to render him conjugal society, and that in default she be dealt with as the court should think fit. The court sat for the first time on the morning of Monday, the 11th of January, 1858, in a room off Westminster Hall that had been a vice-chancellor's until Christmas, and still had the wrong arms over the door. Rosamond did not go. Fenwick had been extremely clear about it. There would be nothing to see, he said, and a great deal to be seen doing, and the newspapers would be there in numbers. And a petitioner who attends the filing of her own petition looks like a woman with an appetite for it. So she sat in 2 rooms on the 2nd floor of a house in Bernard Street, Bloomsbury, at 14 shillings the week including coals, and Martha sat opposite her turning a sheet's sides to middle. And at some point in the middle of the morning Rosamond said, "It will be now," and Martha said, "Yes, my lady," and neither of them said anything else for half an hour. By noon there were 241 petitions on the file. The whole country had been waiting. That was the thing nobody in Parliament had allowed for. They had debated the Act for 2 sessions on the assumption that it concerned a few dozen unhappy people of quality, and the doors had opened. And in came the rest of England, shopkeepers, a schoolmistress from Bermondsey, 3 wives of sailors, a great many people who had been living for years in arrangements the law had no words for. They queued in the passage. The clerks ran out of forms before 3 o'clock. Mr. Alban Reeve had the brief. He was 41, and he was not distinguished, and he had taken it, Fenwick said, for reasons Rosamond had better know about, because she would be told them by somebody less friendly later. "He is not eminent, madam. If he were eminent, he would not touch it. The eminent men are all in Chancery, and they think this court beneath them, and they will think so for about 18 months. And then they will discover their error. Mr. Reeve has taken your brief because it is one of the first, and because whatever Cresswell decides in these early causes will be the law for the next 50 years, And a man of 1 in 40 with a wife and no connections looks at that and sees the only ladder he is ever likely to be shown. He shrugged. You wanted somebody with an interest in winning. There he is. It is not a pretty interest. It is a very reliable one. The Weekly Dispatch had a paragraph on the Saturday, and the Morning Chronicle a longer one. And on the following Wednesday, a man named Josiah Penhale, who was 27 and covered the courts for a paper that sold for a penny, wrote the piece that fixed it. The stamp duty on newspapers had gone in 55. That was the fact that governed everything that happened to Rosamond Ellery for the next 8 months, and she did not know it and would not have understood it if she had. Before 55, a paper cost 5 pence and was read by people with dining rooms. Now it cost a penny, and there were 100 of them, and they were read aloud in workshops. Penhale had got the list of the first day's causes, and had gone down it looking for one with a title in it, and had found one, and had asked 3 questions in the right public house, and had written 400 words. Lady Ashgrove, he wrote, keeps a book. All England is presently going to read it. He went north on the 5th of January, and Rosamond did not hear from him again for 187 days. She had believed on the pavement in Godleman Street that she understood what she was agreeing to. She had thought of it as a rule, of the kind one keeps for a season, no meeting, no letters, the way one gives up sugar in Lent. It was not like that at all. It was like a death, except that a death has a service and a date and people who call. What she had was a man who continued to exist in newspapers and in other people's conversations, 40 miles from wherever she happened to be, and who never once, in 6 months, did anything at all. She looked for it. That was the humiliating part, and she was honest with herself about it, because she had made honesty a habit and could not now put it down. She looked for a private mark in the agony column of the Times. She looked for a hand she did not know on the outside of a letter. In February, a man delivered coals to the house in Bernard Street and stood too long in the passage, and her heart went into her throat, and he was a coal heaver, and he had stood too long because he wanted his money. Nothing came. Nothing ever came, and in the 4th month, she began to understand that this was not restraint on his part, and it was not delicacy. It was the case. Somewhere in Northumberland, a man was sitting in a very large house doing the one thing that was of any use to her, which was nothing, and doing it every day, on purpose, in the full knowledge that she was in Bloomsbury, supposing herself abandoned. She could not decide whether that was the coldest thing she had ever heard of or the kindest, and she came to no settled view on it, then or afterwards. Meanwhile, there was the money. £32 4s does not last, in London, for a woman with a maid, a proctor, a counsel, a court, and no income, and the income had stopped, because the half-yearly payment on the consols went to the trustee, and the trustee was dead, and until the trust was straightened out by somebody in Chancery, nothing whatever came out of it. Fenwick had explained this without emotion. It would be put right eventually. Eventually was not a date. In February, she sold her mother's garnet brooch in Wardour Street for £4.10 and was told, by a man who was not unkind, that garnets were not what they had been. In March, she sold her wedding ring. She thought about that for some days beforehand and had expected to feel something at the counter and did not. And afterwards, she stood in the street and worked out what the feeling actually was. And it was this, that she was selling a plain gold band bought in Newbury in the autumn of '51 by a man who had not troubled to be present at the fitting, in order to pay a proctor to bring a suit against that same man. It had cost him £1.15. It fetched 19 shillings. She wrote it in the book. It was not an entry. The entries had stopped on the 8th of January, and there would never be a no. 44. but she had kept the last pages for accounts, because a woman with no money and a court to attend must know to the penny where she is. The lodging, 14 shillings the week. Coals, Martha's wages, which Martha had twice refused and had twice been made to take. And on the 19th of March, in a room off Westminster Hall, the court made a decree in the suit of Vane v. Vane that Rosamond Ellery, Viscountess Ashgrove, do return to the house of her husband and there render him conjugal society. She had known it was coming. Reeve had told her in February that it would come and that it must not frighten her and that it would frighten her anyway. It is not a discretion, my lady. He asks for it, and he has it, and there is no defense in law to a suit for restitution, except that he has already lost his rights by his conduct, which is the very thing we are trying to prove in the other cause and have not proved yet. So it will be made against you. It signifies nothing by itself. And if I do not go? Alban Reeve had looked at his hands. Then, in the ordinary course, he applies to attach you for contempt, and you are committed to prison until you comply. I shall move at once for a stay, that is, that the order be not enforced until the divorce cause is heard. I think I shall get it, because Cresswell will not wish his new court to begin by locking a woman up in the middle of her own petition. But it will be a stay, my lady, not a discharge. If we win, the order dies with the marriage. If we lose, it wakes up the same afternoon, and there is no third thing. He got the stay on the 11th of May. Rosamond walked back to Bloomsbury from Westminster because a cab was 1 and 6pence, and it rained from Charing Cross. And she understood by the time she reached Bernard Street that she had stopped being a woman bringing a suit and had become a woman with a sentence suspended over her, and that the two were not the same and would never again be the same. 14 shillings the week, £6 11 left. It was Fenwick who found it, and he found it because he was looking for it, and he was looking for it because he was a man who had lost a cause in '49 and had spent 9 years going over the ways in which it might have been lost differently. I have been through every account I can lawfully reach, he said, and a number I cannot, and I have done it because if I do not find it, Mr. Quatermain will. Sit down, my lady. This is not a pleasant office, and I shall not make a business of it. It was the second week of June, and the window was open, and the smell was already bad. From the September quarter of '53 until the Michaelmas of '55, a payment of £5 was made every quarter day from the estate office at Ravensmere to a private account at a savings bank in Holborn. The account is in the name of Martha Craik. Rosamond did not say anything for a while. 8 quarters, said Fenwick, £40 in all. It stopped in the autumn of '55 and has not been resumed. You are certain. I am certain. It took 4 weeks and cost me a friendship at Gosling's, and I am certain. Rosamond got up and went to the window, which looked at a wall. She was doing sums, and the sums were the worst she had ever done in her life, because they came out, the way Martha had known, on the 13th of November, to bring the arnica and the scissors before she had been told anything, the way Martha had said, since March of '53, my lady. Same as you, the white violets. The woman at the corner of Wigmore Street had sold her white violets on and off for 6 years, and Rosamond had never bought them for herself more than twice in a season, because they were 3pence. And somehow, through all of it, there had been violets in the north wing far oftener than twice a season, and she had actually thought, God help her, in '54. And had been ashamed of thinking it, that perhaps the housekeeper ordered them. The thumb. When she was frightened, she pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her palm. She had done it since she was a child. Her mother had smacked her hand for it. Nobody in London knew that. She would have said with confidence that not one living person knew it. She turned round, Mr. Fenwick. On the night of Lady Ferriby's concert, The Duke of Ravensmere told me that my husband would be ruined before the year was out, and that a ruined man wants money, and that there was one sum in that house he could not reach, and that I should find out whether he had reached it. How did he know about the trust? Fenwick did not answer. It is in the settlement, she said. The settlement is a private deed. There are 2 engrossments. One is in the study at Grosvenor Street, and one was sent to Kitesbourne to my father, who died in '54. My lady, who kept my father's papers? I do not know, said Ezra Fenwick, and I am not going to guess, and neither should you. And I am going to say one thing more, and then we shall talk about Dr. Halloran. It was £40, over 2 years, paid to a servant, and it stopped 3 years ago. In this cause that is not a kindness or an unkindness. It is a fact that the other side will have by August, and it will be put to that woman in open court, on oath, and she will have to answer it in front of you. She had it out with Martha in the front room in Bernard Street that evening, with the window shut against the smell and the light going, and it was the worst hour of the whole 8 months, and it was not close. Martha did not deny it. She did not attempt any of the things Rosamond had braced herself for. She sat down on the hard chair with her hands in her lap and told it straight through, in the flat Lincolnshire voice, and it took 4 minutes. In the March of '53, after the 14th, she had gone to a hiring office in the Strand and given notice of her intention to seek a new place, because she had been in service 30 years and had never yet stayed in a house where that went on, and she had a sister in Boston and could go there. Then she had thought about who would be in the north wing after she went, and had not been able to sleep for 4 nights. So on the 2nd of September she had put on her good bonnet and walked to Grosvenor Place and asked at the servants' door of Ravensmere House to speak to the steward, and had been kept waiting 2 hours, and had said her piece to a man in a black coat, that she was maid to Lady Ashgrove, that his lordship struck her, that she could not stop it, and had no witness and no character but her own, and that if she went the lady would be alone in that house with nobody at all, and if she stayed she would end at 50, with nothing put by and no place to go. She had not asked for money, she wanted that said. She had gone there to tell somebody, because there was nobody else in England to tell, and she had chosen that house because everyone in service in Mayfair knew what the Duke of Ravensmere had done to Sir Everard Pike in his own hall in '49, and it was the only address she could think of where such a thing might be believed. The £5 a quarter had begun at Michaelmas. There had been a letter with the first one, from the steward, of 4 lines. It said that the money was for her, that it was not to be spent on the household or on her mistress in any manner whatever, that she was under no obligation of any kind in return, and that she was asked to remain in her place if she found she could. It stopped in the autumn of '55. There had been another letter of 3 lines, which she still had, and she got up and fetched it out of her box and put it on the table. Rosamond read it twice. It regretted that the arrangement must end, and gave no reason, and said that the sum was to be regarded as hers absolutely, and no account of it would ever be asked. "Did you think," Rosamond said at last, "of telling me? Every quarter day for 2 years, my lady, and—" "And what would you have done?" said Martha. "Give it back, turn me off? You'd have turned me off." She looked at her hands. "And then where would you have been? That was not for you to decide." "No," said Martha, "it wasn't." She said it without any defense at all, and it was that, in the end, that Rosamond could not get past, because there it was, laid out on the table between them, plain as an account. 2 people had sat down, in '53, in rooms she had never been in, and had discussed the conditions of her life, and had come to a decision about it, and had put money behind the decision, and had then arranged matters so that she should continue not to know. Her father had done that over brandy in a study in Shropshire in the summer of '51. Her mother had done it folding linen. Her husband did it every day of his life. That was what a husband was. And the two people in the world who loved her had done it as well, out of tenderness, with the best will imaginable. And the result was identical, a woman managed, for her own good, by persons who had not thought it necessary to consult her. "You will go tomorrow," Rosamond said. Martha stood up. "Yes, my lady." She went out and shut the door, and Rosamond sat in the dark for a long time with the letter in her hand. And then, because it was what she did, she got up and lit the candle and fetched the papers and set to work, because Reeve wanted the witness list settled by the Saturday. There were 9 names on it. Peart, gone for a soldier, untraced. Yeo, dismissed without a character, untraced. Bright, dead. Halloran, hostile. A footman called Digweed, who had been in the house 11 months in '56 and had been found and had refused, in writing, in a hand of great difficulty. Craik M. in 6 entries out of the 9. Rosamond looked at the sheet for a long time, and then she put her head down on her arms on the table, in the dark, in a lodging in Bernard Street, and she understood exactly what she had done at 8 o'clock that evening, and that it had been just, and that she could not afford it. She fetched her back the next morning at 6:30, on the stairs, before she had gone, and neither of them made a speech about it. "I was wrong to say it as I did," Rosamond said, "and I was not wrong to be angry. And both of those things are going to have to stand together, because I have not the time to sort them out, and neither have you. Mr. Reeve wants the list by Saturday. Will you swear to entries 9, 17, 26, 31, 39, and 43? Martha put down the box. "Yes. They will ask you about the £40, in open court, in front of the newspapers. And Mr. Quatermain will make it sound like the worst thing that has ever been done. And there will be nothing I can do about it, from where I am sitting. Then they'll ask me," said Martha, "and I'll tell them. And it'll sound like what it was, which is a servant who'd nowhere to go." She picked the box up again and carried it back to her room. "I'll want my good bonnet cleaned. That Mr. Quatermain won't get much off me in a clean bonnet. 9 names, 5 of them worthless." So Rosamond went and found the others herself, in the last 3 weeks of June. In the hottest and foulest month London had known within living memory, and she did it alone, because Reeve's clerk cost 2 shillings a day, and she had £6 and 11 pence. She found James Peart at Billingsgate. He had not gone for a soldier at all. He had gone to sea for 2 years and come back and married a fishporter's daughter, and now sold whelks off a barrow at the top of Lower Thames Street. And he was 28 and had a scar on his lip and did not want to know. She went 3 times. The 3rd time she did not argue with him. She read him entry number 26, standing on the cobbles with the barrow between them, and he listened to the whole of it and then said, 16th of April. It was raining. I had the boots on, and put his hand over his eyes. She found Sarah Yeo in Manchester, in a court off Ancoats, in a house with 4 families in it. She went up on the 18th of June by the 3rd class, which was 1 and 9 pence more than she could spend, on a wooden bench in an open truck, with the smuts coming back off the engine. 11 hours up and 11 hours back, with 4 hours in between, and she did not sleep either way, because there was nothing to lean against. Sarah Yeo had been dismissed in the March of '55 without a character, 3 days after entry number 31, and had been 11 weeks getting a place because of it, and had lost the place, and had come north. She was 24 and looked 40 and had a child asleep in a drawer. She said, "They'll ask why I was turned off." Yes. "They'll say I was turned off for thieving." That's what was put about. "Yes," said Rosamond. "And then Mr. Reeve will ask you what you heard on the night of the 3rd of March in the passage outside the small parlor, and you will tell them, and half of England will read it on Saturday. And whether they believe the first thing or the second is not in my gift, and I will not pretend to you that it is." Sarah Yeo looked at the child in the drawer for some time. "I'll come," she said, "if you pay the fare. I've not got the fare." And on the last Friday in June, on the corner of Wigmore Street and Duke Street, Rosamond stopped a flower seller's basket that had been standing on that corner since before her marriage, and asked the woman a question. And the woman, who was called Anne Skeggs and was 61 and had 4 teeth, said, "Bless you, my lady, 6 year. Twice a week, 3 year together, and always the white ones, and always to be sent up, and never no card with 'em. I said to my daughter, I said, there's a lady buys herself flowers and gets 'em sent, which is the saddest thing I ever heard of." She sniffed. "Course I'll come. I've been to the Old Bailey twice." 9 names had become 14. Rosamond walked home along Oxford Street in the heat, with 4 shillings and 3 pence in her purse, and the smell of the river coming up over Soho Wells, and she was not happy. And she was something she had no word for, and had never been before, which was the person who had done it. The cause of Ellery, falsely called Vane against Vane, was called on for hearing on Monday, the 11th of July, 1858, in the hottest and worst summer that anybody in London could remember. The Thames had stopped being a river in the 3rd week of June. It had become an open drain at low water twice a day, and the smell came up over Westminster in a solid wall. And at the Houses of Parliament they had hung the riverfront windows with curtains soaked in chloride of lime, and it had made no difference at all. Committees rose and fled. Members went about with handkerchiefs at their faces. In 18 days that summer, a legislature, which had spent 30 years declining to spend money on a sewer, would vote £3 million for one, because for the first time in 30 years the men voting could smell it themselves. The court sat with the windows shut. Everybody understood why. It was 91 degrees in the passage outside, and rather more inside, and the Whigs were a torture. And Mr. Justice Cresswell, who was 64 and dry as a stick, and had the reputation of a man who had never in his life been carried away by anything, sat through it without once acknowledging that it was happening. The room was full. It had been full every day since January. There were 4 rows of gentlemen of the press, and Josiah Penhale had the end of the second. And the whole of England was that week reading about Brentford. The business had broken on the 23rd of June and had not left the papers since. A gentleman of very great literary distinction, standing for Parliament at Hertford, had been publicly denounced by his wife at the hustings, and within 24 hours 2 medical men had signed, and the lady had been taken up and carried to a licensed private establishment at Brentford, and there she remained. Rosamond read it on the 24th of June in a lodging in Bernard Street, and had to put the paper down and sit with her head between her knees, because she had heard the name of that place before, in a shabby study in Grosvenor Street, on the 8th of January, from a man holding a folded sheet between 2 fingers. By the 11th of July, half London had signed something about it. The other half had decided the lady was mad after all. But the fact of the thing was in the air of that courtroom when Rosamond went into the witness box, and every man in it knew what 2 signatures could do to a woman in a fortnight, and knew it not as a legal proposition, but as this week's news. She was in the black gown. She had had it turned in June for 1 6. She was in the box for 4 hours and 10 minutes on that first day. Reeve took her through it slowly, entry by entry, and the ledger went up to the bench and came down again and went round the jury box that had nobody in it because there was no jury, and twice Cresswell put out his hand for it himself and read a page and gave it back without comment. She had thought she would be frightened. She was frightened for perhaps 2 minutes. What she had not expected and what she thought about afterwards for years was how much of it was simply reading aloud. She had written those lines in a cold room at the end of a north wing, with nobody in the world to show them to, and had written them flat on purpose, because a court would want them flat. And now there was a court, and she read them out flat, and they were exactly right. And she understood standing there that the girl of 19 who had ruled those columns with a straight edge had built this, precisely this, without ever having seen it. Number 9, number 17, number 26. At 3:45, Reeves said, "Number 39, my lady." And she read that one too, all 4 lines of it, and did not look at anybody at all. And at the far end of the 4th row, behind the solicitors, a woman in gray, with her hands loose in her lap, sat and listened to it, and did not move. Mr. Silas Quartermain rose on the Tuesday morning. He was 49 and heavy and softly spoken, and he had a manner of great courtesy. And Fenwick had said of him that he had never in 20 years been known to bully a woman in a witness box, because bullying a woman was ineffective. And Mr. Quartermain was not interested in anything ineffective. He called Dr. Cornelius Halloran first. Halloran was in the box for 1 hour and 20 minutes, and he did not tell a single lie that could be shown to be one. He had attended Lady Ashgrove upon 4 occasions between 54 and 56. On each occasion, he had found contusions. On each occasion, the injuries had been, in his professional judgment, consistent with a fall. He was pressed on this and repeated it with patience, consistent with a fall, and consistent also with other causes. And it was not for a medical man to say which, and he had recorded what he was told. He had also observed, and had noted in his day book at the time, a nervous excitability of some years' standing, with periods of seclusion, and Mr. Quartermain begged him to be exact an unnatural habit of writing. Would your lordship look at the entry? It is dated the 9th of November, 55. 2 years and 8 months before this petition was filed. Cresswell looked at it, and said nothing, and gave it back. Then Quartermain came to the book. He did it beautifully. Rosamond, sitting behind her counsel with her hands in her lap, was able to admire it, in the way one admires a thing being done well by somebody who is taking one's life away. He did not say the book was false. He said something far worse. He said it was late. My lord, the petitioner's case rests upon a manuscript volume said to have been kept contemporaneously over 4 years and 4 months. I invite your lordship to consider 3 matters. First, that it is written throughout in one hand, in one ink, at one slope, with no correction, no blot and no crossing out, from the first page to the last. I have practiced 23 years, and I have never seen a domestic memorandum of any kind that looks so. Second, that it is ruled in 7 columns with headings, of which the 5th is persons within hearing, and the 6th is physician sent for. My lord, those are not the headings a frightened girl of 19 writes in a bedroom. Those are the headings of a brief. That is the 5th column of a proof of evidence, and it was drawn by somebody who knew what a court would want to know. And third, and I put this with all the delicacy the matter allows, the volume was produced to Mr. Fenwick in the November of last year, 11 weeks after the royal assent to this statute, and 8 weeks before this court first sat. My lord, I say the whole of it was written last autumn. And if your lordship should think that too strong, then I say this instead, and it is enough for my purpose. What manner of woman writes down, for 4 years and 4 months, that she is being beaten in a ruled book, with the witnesses set out in a column, and does not once, in 4 years and 4 months, go out of the house? That is not the conduct of a woman enduring cruelty, my lord. That is the conduct of a woman assembling a case, years before there was any court on earth to bring it in. She was not waiting to escape. She was waiting for a statute. There was a sound in the room, Not quite a murmur. Rosamond looked straight ahead at the back of Reeves' wig, and the thing that went through her had a curious shape to it, because it was not indignation. It was recognition. He was right. That was the difficulty. He was right about all of it. And the only thing he had got wrong was the moral of it, and there was no way she knew of to explain, to a room of 200 people in 90 degrees of heat, why a girl of 19 had ruled a fifth-column-headed persons within hearing, that it was not cunning, that it was the exact opposite of cunning, that it was what is left of a person when she has been told for 2 years that a thing did not happen the way she remembers, and has begun, in the small hours, to be afraid that it did not. Josiah Penhale wrote 900 words that night, and they were in 80,000 houses by Thursday morning. The lady with the ledger, he called her. He wrote that the reader might make of it what he pleased, that a wife of 19 had begun, 3 days after her birthday, to keep an account of her own injuries in 7 ruled columns, like a corn chandler, and that whether this was the most pitiable thing the writer had ever heard of in a court of law, or the coldest, he had been sitting in that room for 2 days, and did not yet know. He also wrote, at the end, in the 5th column of the first entry, against the head persons within hearing, the petitioner has written 2 words. They are none seen. By the Friday, 3 papers had come out against her. Mr. Quatermain came to the collusion on Tuesday, the 20th of July, and he came at it in 3 strokes, in ascending order, the way a man fells a tree. The first was Martha Craik. She was in the box in the clean bonnet, and she had been giving her evidence for 2 hours, well, in the flat Lincolnshire voice, when he asked her whether she had ever received money from any person other than her employer. She said yes. She said £40, £5 a quarter for 8 quarters, from the estate office at Ravensmere, from Michaelmas 53 to Michaelmas 55, into a savings bank in Holborn. The room made a noise. Cresswell said 1 word and it stopped. And did you tell your mistress? No, sir. Never in 5 years? Never. Mrs. Craik, said Quatermain, very gently, who sent you to Grosvenor Place in the September of 53. Nobody sent me. I went. Nobody sent you. Nobody sent me, said Martha Craik. I'd nowhere else to go, sir, and I'd nobody to tell. And I'd heard what that house had done for Sir Everard Pike's lady. So I put my bonnet on, and I walked there myself, and I stood at the back door 2 hours, and I told a man in a black coat, and I asked for nothing. And I'd not have taken a farthing, except that I was 50, and had £4.11 put by after 30 years in service, and there was nowhere for me to go either. The second stroke was the Duke. Quatermain did it without raising his voice at all. That the petitioner's proctor was in constant communication with Ravensmere House. That the petitioner had been seen with his Grace in the street in December. That his Grace had a private and long-standing animus against the whole institution of marriage as it stood, arising out of a matter of his own family in 49. That this was not a wife's petition but a duke's, brought in a wife's name. And the third stroke was Fenwick. My lord, the proctor who drew this petition is Mr. Ezra Fenwick, and Mr. Ezra Fenwick was the proctor for the respondent in Pike against Pike in 49, in which he was defeated. It is 9 years. He has, if I may say so without offense, waited a long while for a court in which he might lose that case the other way about. Alban Reeve got up on the Wednesday morning. He was not eloquent, and he knew it, and he had decided, Fenwick said afterwards, to be arithmetical instead, on the theory that Cresswell was arithmetical. He answered the third stroke first and briefly, that Mr. Fenwick's fee in this cause was to come out of costs if the petitioner succeeded, and out of nothing at all if she failed. That it had been so agreed in writing in November, that the writing was in his lordship's hands, and that if a man's having once lost a case disqualified him from ever acting again, the profession would be considerably reduced. He answered the first with dates, £40, to a servant, never to the petitioner. Every farthing of it paid before the autumn of '55. Stopped unasked. 3 years before the act was thought of, and here he handed up the steward's second letter, 3 lines long, which said no more than that the arrangement must end and gave no reason. My lord, my learned friend invites you to find that this money was the beginning of a conspiracy. I invite your lordship to notice that whoever stopped it in the autumn of '55 for no reason he was prepared to put on paper, and that a man who intends to bring a suit 3 years hence does not, 3 years beforehand, cut off the only line of communication he has to the house. Then, the second stroke, which was the one that mattered. The Duke of Ravensmere left London on the 5th of January. The petition was filed on the 11th. My lord, from the 5th of January to the morning my client entered, that box is 187 days. In that time there has been no meeting. There has been no letter. There has been no message by any hand. There has been no man of business, no servant, no intermediary, no shilling. My learned friend has had the summer to find one, and has not produced a scrap of paper, because there is not a scrap of paper to produce. My lord, my learned friend says this is a duke's petition. Then let him explain the conduct of the duke. A man who is procuring a divorce does not vanish for 6 months on the day it is filed. He funds it. He advises. He is seen at the door. The one thing he does not do is leave the petitioner in a lodging in Bernard Street at 14 shillings the week, selling her wedding ring in the March to pay for it, believing herself abandoned, which, my lord, is what she did believe. And my learned friend may cross-examine her upon that, if he wishes to hear it said aloud. And then he came to the book, and he did the thing that Rosamond had not been able to think of and had lain awake 3 nights trying to. He did not defend it. He asked for a candle. My lord, I ask your lordship to look at the inside of the front board and to have it brought near a light. There are 2 inscriptions. The upper is in a black ink which has browned at the edge of every stroke. The lower is in a blue-black ink which has not. My learned friend says the whole of this volume was written in the autumn of last year. Then the 2 inks were bought in the same season and have aged 5 years apart. And I ask your lordship to compare the hand. The upper is round, and it slopes forward, and the descenders are looped. The lower is small and upright, and the descenders are straight. It is the same woman. It is not the same woman at 19 and at 21. And there is not a schoolmistress in England who would tell your lordship otherwise. My learned friend asks what manner of woman keeps such a book for 4 years and does not leave the house. My lord, I will answer him. He asks it as though the door were standing open. Before the 11th of January of this year, a wife in England who left her husband's house could be fetched back to it by an order of a court, and imprisoned if she would not go, and my learned friend knows this better than most, because he applied for such an order against this woman on the 14th of January and obtained it on the 19th of March, and it is in existence now, stayed by your lordship's own hand, and it will revive the moment she loses this cause. She did not leave because there was nowhere to go and no law to go to. She could not petition because there was nothing to petition. She could not sue because a wife cannot sue. She could not be believed because a wife is not believed. So she did the only thing that was left to a person in her position, which was to write it down and keep it dry and wait. My learned friend says she was waiting for a statute. She was. She waited 4 years and 4 months, and the statute came. And she was in this building on the first morning that it sat. My lord, she was not late. She was early. She was standing in the queue before the door was built. Mr. Justice Cresswell wrote for some time, Then he said that he would hear the remainder of the petitioner's evidence on the 3rd of August, and that the windows were to remain shut and rose. The trunk had been 11 months getting to London. It had come out of the Residency at Lucknow in the November of '57 with the rest of the officers' effects when Sir Colin Campbell took the garrison off, and had gone down to Allahabad by bullock cart, and had lain 4 months in a store shed at Calcutta, while the regimental agents argued about who was to pay the freight of a dead captain's box to a family that had not written to claim it, because the family had not been told. Then a man had paid the freight, and the box had gone into a sailing ship at Diamond Harbor in the March, because the P&O steamers took passengers and mails and not much else, and had gone round the Cape, and had come up the Channel at the end of June, and had been landed at Gravesend on the 2nd of July. Sergeant Amos Dyer brought it to Westminster on the 3rd of August. He was 38 of the 32nd, invalided with a wound in the shoulder that had never closed properly, and he had been in the Residency from the first day to the last, and he stood in the box with his cap under his arm and answered Mr. Reeve in a voice you could hear in the passage. He had known Captain Ellery. He had served under him at the Cawnpore Battery and afterwards on the roof of the brigade mess. Captain Ellery had been killed by a marksman in a house across the road at about 6 in the evening of the 30th of July, and Sergeant Dyer had been 11 feet from him at the time, and had helped carry him down, and had helped bury him that night in the garden by the church, because in that place you buried people the same night. Mr. Reeve handed up a certified return from the muster rolls of the 32nd Regiment of Foot, and a certified copy of the burial register kept in the Residency, both obtained from the Horse Guards in the June. Then he handed up a deed dated the 12th of September, 1857, bearing the signature Theodore Ellery, Captain, 32nd Rect. Mr. Justice Cresswell looked at the 2 documents for rather a long time. Then Mr. Reeve asked Sergeant Dyer to open the trunk, which was standing on the floor of the court, and to identify its contents. And among the contents was a leather wallet containing 11 letters that Captain Ellery had written, and had not been able to send, because from the 30th of June, nothing had gone out of that place at all. 9 of them were to his sister. The 10th was to a Major Hollis at Aldershot, and it was dated the 4th of May, 1855, and it had been begun in England and carried 3 years, and never finished nor posted, and Mr. Reeve read 4 sentences of it aloud, which was all he needed. They said that the writer had that week seen something on his sister's wrist at Aldershot, that she had had it 2 years and had told nobody, that he intended, when his leg would carry him, to go up to town and deal with the husband himself, and that if Hollis heard he had done anything foolish, he was to know that it had not been done in drink. Then Mr. Reeve sat down, and Mr. Quatermain rose, and asked the sergeant 2 questions about the date of the burial, and received 2 answers, and sat down again. There was nothing else to ask. Rosamond sat behind her counsel with her hands in her lap, and did not weep, and thought about the 11 letters, and about a man who had said on a heath at Aldershot that when there was a court he would come home and swear to it. He had not come home. He was in a garden by a church 4,500 miles away, and he was going to stay there. And he had got here anyway, in a box, round the Cape, 11 months at 4 knots. 13 days later, on the 16th of August, London went out of its mind about the cable. They had joined it in mid-ocean on the 29th of July and landed the shore end in Ireland on the 5th of August. And on the 16th, the Queen's message went to the President of the United States, and the presidents came back. And there were bonfires in the city, and the bells rang, and 100 guns went off in New York. And the Times said that since the discovery of Columbus, nothing had been done to enlarge human ideas to compare with it, and men stood in the street outside the newspaper offices doing sums about how many minutes a word had taken. Rosamond read about it in a lodging in Bernard Street, with 4 shillings and 3 pence in her purse. She thought, a wire under 2,000 miles of water, and a word across it in a quarter of an hour, and the whole of England in the street about it, and a box 11 months at sea, and a letter 3 years in a dead man's wallet. And it was the box that had saved her. Camilla Vaux, Baroness Milbourne, went into the witness box on the 10th of August for the petitioner, and nobody had subpoenaed her. She wished that understood, and she had made Mr. Fenwick write it down, and she had signed it, that she attended of her own motion and had asked for nothing and had been offered nothing. She was not doing it out of remorse. She had been asked, afterwards, several times, by people who wanted to be told a better story, and she had always declined to provide one. She had done it for 2 reasons, and she could have set them out on a card. The first was that on the 4th of February, in the drawing-room at Grosvenor Street, 3 weeks after his wife had walked out of it, Rupert had told her that when the decree was made absolute, they would be married in the spring. He had said it as a gift. He had been rather moved. He had taken her hand, and Camilla Vaux, who was 35, and who had been a widow for 8 years, had sat with her hand in his and done the arithmetic that no woman in England is taught and every woman in England learns. She had £420 a year settled on her at her own marriage in 45 and secured to her upon Milbourne's death. She had the lease of a house in Half Moon Street. She had £1,100 in the funds, and a small property near Tring that had been her mother's, and the whole of it was hers absolutely, to sell or to keep or to leave as she liked, and she could sue upon it, and give a receipt for it, and be believed about it. She had all that for exactly one reason: she was not married. On the day she became a wife again, every shilling of it would cease to be hers. The income would be his to receive. The house would be his to let. The £1,100 would be his to draw. The property near Tring would be his to sell, and she could not stop him. And she could not go to law about it, because she would no longer be a person who could go to law about anything. She had known this in a general way for 8 years, as one knows the weather. What she had not done until the 4th of February was the particular sum. She had gone the next week to Mr. Cotterell in Bedford Row and asked what could be done, and had been told a settlement, executed before the marriage, putting the whole to her separate use with trustees. She had put it to Rupert on the 22nd of February. He had been perfectly charming about it for 11 days. Then he had said that he could not have it thought, in his present situation, that he had married a woman who would not trust him, and that a settlement at his age was an insult, and that she was to leave the business alone. She had left it alone, and on the 9th of March, in the study, looking for a lease, she had found a letter to a bill broker in Bucklersbury of the previous November, on which her own signature stood as a surety in her own hand, with the long loop on the C that she had not used since she was a girl. She had never seen the letter before in her life. That was the second reason, and it was the shorter one, and it was the one that decided her. A settlement is a piece of paper, and she had just learned what this particular gentleman did with pieces of paper when he was short. So she stood in the box on the 10th of August for 2 hours and 35 minutes, and gave evidence that established both limbs of the petitioner's case at once, and did it without a single word of color, because Mr. Reeve had told her that the moment she embroidered it, she was worthless. She proved the adultery out of her own mouth, which nobody could contradict, the dates, the rooms, the 6 years, the arrangement of the house. And she proved the cruelty, which was the thing they had been unable to prove for 7 months, because she had lived in the room next to it. She had heard the 13th of November through a wall. She had heard the 14th of March, 53, from the head of the stairs. She had heard a bedroom door in the north wing locked from the outside on 11 occasions that she could name, and had once, in 56, gone up and tried it herself at 2 in the morning and found it fast, and had gone down again and said nothing to anybody. And she was asked by Mr. Quatermain whether she was ashamed of that, and she said that she was, and that being ashamed of it was not evidence, and she had been asked here to give evidence. And she said that on the 2nd of December, 56, she had been present when Lord Ashgrove gave Dr. Halloran £50 in notes in the study, and that Dr. Halloran had put it in his pocketbook and had said that his lordship should not think of it. Cross-examined, she agreed that she was the woman with whom the adultery was charged. She agreed that she had been living in the house on the petitioner's charity. She agreed that she had been promised marriage and that the promise was now at an end. She agreed, when it was put to her in terms, that she had no motive of affection for the petitioner whatever. "None at all, madam." "None at all," said Lady Milbourne. "I do not know her. I have lived in her house for 6 years, and I have never had a conversation with her that lasted 5 minutes. She met Rosamond in the passage afterwards, by accident, in the crush by the door, in the smell and the heat. They stood for a moment. I did not do that for you," said Camilla. "I know," said Rosamond. "If you had, I should not have believed you." And that was the whole of it. They did not shake hands, and they never spoke again, and each of them thought about the other for the rest of her life. Mr. Justice Cresswell gave judgment on the 25th of August, 1858, at 11 in the morning, in a room where the windows had been shut for 6 weeks. He took 50 minutes, and he read most of it from notes. He found the adultery proved, and said that it had never seriously been an issue. He found the cruelty proved, and set out the entries on which he relied, and observed that he relied upon them not because they were in the petitioner's book, but because in each case there had been produced a living witness who had spoken to the same event from the other side of a door, and that a book of this kind was worth exactly as much as the persons who could stand up and confirm it, and no more, and that in this cause there had been 14 of them. Upon the suggestion of collusion he was brief, and Fenwick said afterwards, unmistakably annoyed. He said that the court had a duty to satisfy itself, and had satisfied itself. That the payments to the witness Craik were made to a servant, at her own instance, and had ceased in 55. That the conduct of the nobleman named had been, so far as the evidence went, the conduct of a man taking pains to remain outside a cause in which he was believed to have an interest, and that the court was not prepared to hold that a man's absence for 187 days was evidence of his presence. He pronounced a decree for the dissolution of the marriage. He discharged the decree for restitution of conjugal rights of the 19th of March. He ordered the respondent to pay the petitioner's costs, taxed together with a sum of £120 in respect of her expenses of witnesses, and he directed that the papers relating to a certain deed, dated the 12th of September, 1857, be sent to the solicitor to the Treasury, with the depositions of Sergeant Amos Dyer and the certified returns of the 32nd Regiment of Foot. Rosamond stood up when she was told to, and sat down when she was told to, and did not, at any point in the 50 minutes, feel anything whatever, which she had not expected, and which lasted about 9 hours. The rest of it came in pieces over the following weeks. Rupert Vane was arrested on the 7th of September and committed for trial at the Central Criminal Court on a charge of forging a deed. He was in Newgate 11 days before somebody found the bail. Dr. Cornelius Halloran was written to by the registrar of the college in the October in respect of certain evidence given in the court of divorce, and did not practice in Wimpole Street after the following spring. And the cable died. It had been failing all through August. The insulation had been driven at too high a voltage by a man in a hurry at Valentia, and by the end of the month it was taking 2 hours to pass a word. And on the 1st of September it stopped altogether and never spoke again. The shares of every company that had ridden on it went to nothing in a fortnight. The Anglo-Continental Submarine Telegraph and Cable Company of Threadneedle Street was wound up in the November, and the calls were enforced against the shareholders. And Rupert Vane was made bankrupt in the February of '59 on the petition of a gutta percha merchant for £11,200. The Berkshire estate went, the Sleason Grosvenor Street went, which meant that the costs awarded to Rosamond on the 25th of August, taxed at £490 16 shillings, and the £120 for her witnesses, were never paid, and never could be paid, and are presumably owing still. She had £32 4 shillings when she walked out of the house in January. She had £11 2 and 6 on the day the decree was pronounced, and a bill from Mr. Fenwick, which he declined to send. That was the arithmetic of it. And she wrote it in the back of the book with everything else, because the act protected a divorced woman's earnings and property from that day forward, and not one day before it, so that everything she had ever had went with the marriage, and everything she should ever earn was her own. She was free, and she was 25, and she had £11. Josiah Penhale wrote his third piece on the 26th of August, and it was the one that was reprinted, and it was reprinted for 30 years. He wrote that in July he had called her the lady with the ledger, and had not known whether the thing was pitiable or cold, and that he now knew, and that he had been a fool. He wrote that there were at that moment some hundreds of thousands of women in England in houses with a north wing and a locked door, and that the law had until January offered them precisely nothing, and now offered them a room in Westminster and a very high hill to climb, and that this was not justice, but it was the first thing that had ever been offered at all. And he wrote that any woman reading this who could not think what to do had better do what Lady Ashgrove did at 19 years of age, which was to buy a ruled book for 1 9 and put down the date, the hour, the place, what was done, and who was near enough to hear it. He came south in the September, and she went north in the October, and it was the 4th of that month before they were in the same room, and neither of them made any pretense that it was a coincidence. Ravensmere was very large and very cold, even in October, and there was a great deal of it she never afterwards remembered. He took her up to the 3rd floor and along a passage, and opened a door and stood back. There were 2 things in the room. The first was a trunk. It was a soldier's trunk, with the corners gone, and a new leather handle on the near end, and the old handle lying beside it on the floor because whoever had put the new one on had not liked to throw the old one away. Rosamond stood in the doorway. It was in a store shed at Calcutta, she said. 4 months. The agents would not send it home. Somebody paid the freight. Yes. When? February. It went into a sailing ship in the March because I could not use the mail steamers, the P. And O, keep a passenger list and a bill of lading, and both are public. It came round the Cape in another man's name. It was landed at Gravesend and lay in a bonded warehouse 3 weeks. And it went to the Horse Guards. And the Horse Guards sent it to Mr. Fenwick. And Mr. Fenwick never knew where it came from, and does not know now. You could not write to me. You could not send me a shilling, and you sent a box round the Cape. A box is not evidence of anything, said Gideon. It came from the regiment. Everything in it belonged to your brother, and nothing in it belonged to me. And if Quatermain had traced the freight, he would have found a shipping agent in Leadenhall Street, who was acting for a client he had never met. He looked at the trunk. I was not going to tell you. I had decided that in the march, and I had held to it until about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Why tell me now? Because you would have found out in 11 years from a clerk, he said. And I would rather you had it from me in a cold room. The second thing in the room was a small drawing in a plain frame, hung by itself on the wall opposite the window. It was pencil, on paper about 9 inches by 7, and it was not good. The perspective of the roof was wrong. The girl's near shoulder was too high and had been rubbed out twice, and put back no better. It was a girl of about 17 in white muslin, standing under a very large tree, with her head tipped back and one hand up, marking the air with a finger. Rosamond looked at it for a long time. There is only one, she said. There is only one. I had thought she stopped, because it was foolish, and then said it anyway, because they had got past the point of not saying things. In the winter, when I was very low, I used to think that there must be a room like this somewhere, with 6 of me in it. A portrait for every year. It was the sort of thing I told myself instead of sleeping. No, said Gideon, why not? Because I saw you properly once, he said, on the 14th of June, 1851, for about 4 minutes, and I had no right to any of the rest of it. For the rest of it, I only ever knew where you were. He put his hands behind his back. I did that badly the same week, and I have never done another. A man who has 6 paintings made of a woman he has not spoken to has not been loving her. He has been collecting her. I have been perfectly clear with myself about that from the beginning, and I would ask you to be clear about it too. Rosamond turned round. Then answered the thing I have wanted to ask since October, she said. Why a date? You had 6 years. You could have written to me. You could have said one honest sentence in a passage at any house in London, and I should have carried it about for the rest of my life. Instead, you crossed a ballroom in front of 300 people, in the most conspicuous manner a man could possibly contrive, and you said the 11th of January, and you walked away and left me standing there. It was the strangest thing anybody has ever done to me. Half of London thought you were claiming me. My husband thought so. She thought so. I very nearly thought so. Why? Gideon Marchcroft stood by the window for a moment. Because I had nothing to give you, he said. That is not an answer. It is the whole answer, and I have had a year in Northumberland to make it shorter, and cannot. I could not take you out of that house. I had done that once, and it killed my sister. I could not give you money. Money is the first thing they look for, and 1 shilling of mine would have ended you. I could not advise you. Advice is procuring. I could not stand beside you in that court, or write to you, or be seen at your door, or send you so much as a note when they were printing that you were cold and cunning, and I was reading it in a newspaper 4 days old at a breakfast table 300 miles away. There was nothing I was permitted to do. That is not a figure of speech. I had it from Fenwick in writing, and I read it twice a week. So I did the one thing that was left. I could not buy you the law. I could only tell you the day the door opened, and then stand far enough back that I did not block it. He looked at her, and I said it in the middle of a ballroom in front of 300 people, he said, because if I had said it quietly in a passage, it would have been a secret between us. And a secret between us was precisely the thing that would have hanged you in August. I wanted it public, and I wanted it absurd. I wanted 200 people to swear that the Duke of Ravensmere said 6 words to Lady Ashgrove in front of the whole room and never went near her again. Rosamond began to laugh, and then found she was not laughing. She crossed the room and stood in front of the window, and looked out at the park, going brown, and after a while she put up her hand and began, without thinking about it at all, to count the panes in the sash, 8 across and 6 down and 4 small ones in the transom above, 52. He watched her do it and said nothing whatever, and she understood, from the quality of his silence, that he knew what she was doing, and had known for 7 years, and had never once mentioned it. They were married in the September of 1859, in a small chapel in Northumberland, on a Thursday morning, with the doors open. There were 9 people. Martha Craik was one, and Ezra Fenwick was another, and he cried, which nobody had expected, least of all himself. There was no ball. There were no 300 people. There was no staircase to come down, and no ballroom to fall silent. And Rosamund had been extremely clear on that point, and had given her reasons only once and never repeated them. Afterwards they went into the vestry, and the register was brought out, and the clerk turned it round and dipped the pen and gave it to her. Rosamund stood with it in her hand for a moment. She was 25. She had signed 4 documents in her life. She had signed a settlement in a room in Lincoln's Inn Fields at 17, surrounded by men talking over her head, and a marriage register at Kitesbourne in a gown that weighed more than she did, and 2 receipts for money that was not hers to receive. Not one of them had been signed by a person. A wife in England was not a person. She could not contract, or hold a shilling or sou, or be believed, and every one of those signatures had been made by a woman who did not exist in law, in favor of a man who did. This was the 5th. She wrote her name, and it took perhaps 4 seconds, and it was the first document she had ever signed as somebody the law agreed was there. Then she gave the pen to her husband. The man had crossed a ballroom to read her out a date. Every soul in that room had believed they were watching a claim being staked, and had said so and had gone on saying so for a year. Only she had ever known that he had come to tell her the way out.